The first thing anyone ever remembered about Morty was not a laugh or a word, but a soundless stillness. He was a child who lingered in corners, looking at the ceiling as though he could hear something hidden above the lamps, as though the sky itself had lowered just enough to murmur secrets only he could understand. Adults said he was quiet, that he fidgeted too much, that he drifted away in thought, but Morty felt, even then, that silence itself was speaking to him. At night, when the house was hushed, he would lie awake and feel his heartbeat stretch out into the dark. It was in those moments, when the stars outside his window blinked in uneven rhythms, that he first believed they were alive, whispering his name in ways the world could not hear. He never told anyone. It was not fear that kept him silent, but a kind of tenderness. He wanted to protect the strangeness, to hold it in his small hands like a fragile lantern. If he spoke it aloud, maybe it would shatter into laughter, into disbelief, into nothing at all. So instead, he kept it safe, a quiet seed at the back of his mind, and let it grow without notice. Sometimes he would press his palm against the glass of the window and imagine he could feel the pulse of distant suns, faint but steady. It comforted him the way a lullaby does, soft and endless, belonging only to him. In school, Morty was neither the brightest nor the most invisible. He sat in the middle of classrooms, half listening, half dreaming, his pencil wandering into sketches of stars and wandering roads that led nowhere. Teachers marked his papers with uneven red lines, sometimes disappointed, sometimes encouraging. But Morty hardly noticed. He was not lazy, he simply lived between two worlds, one that hummed with rules and chatter, and another that glowed quietly behind his eyelids. Even when friends called him to play, he often hesitated, torn between joining their games and following the strange pull of a dream that felt more real than the field outside. One night, when he was very young, he had a dream that felt like more than a dream. He stood in a hallway that seemed endless, lined with doors that breathed faint light from their cracks. Each door looked ordinary, wooden, plain, familiar, but Morty knew, without being told, that behind them waited entire lives. He reached for one, a door marked faintly with scratches, but the wood felt warm, pulsing like skin, and he drew back. He did not yet know how to choose, so he wandered instead, listening. Somewhere far ahead, faint and soothing, someone was humming. He walked toward it, but before he arrived, the dream dissolved like mist, and he woke with tears on his cheeks. He didn't know why he was crying, only that something important had almost revealed itself. For days, that dream stayed with him like a shadow. He told no one, not even his grandfather, who often spoke of strange things as if they were facts. Morty had learned that Rick's words were like sparks, too bright, too quick, hard to hold on to. But Morty's dream was different. It was not wild or loud or clever. It was quiet. It asked for patience. And though he was too young to put it into words, Morty sensed that his life would always be made of such doors, moments of choice, tender and trembling, that shaped everything without anyone else noticing. One afternoon, in the golden slant of early evening, Morty sat alone in the yard, his notebook on his lap. He was supposed to be writing about rivers for school, but instead he drew a sky full of tiny circles, stars, moons, or maybe just dots that wanted to be something else. The air was warm, bees moving lazily between flowers, and for the first time, Morty felt a deep calm settle into him. He thought about the dream again, about the humming that had led him down the hallway, and he realized with a soft certainty that the sound was still with him, not loud, not urgent, just present. a reminder. That night, when his grandfather stumbled into the living room, muttering about portals and equations, Morty looked at him differently. He wondered if Rick, in his own way, had seen the hallway too. If maybe that was why he built machines, why he tore holes in space, why he was always searching. Morty didn't ask, though. He simply watched the old man slump onto the couch, sighing as if the universe weighed on his bones. Something in Morty wanted to comfort him, but the words stayed tucked away, soft and unfinished. Instead, Morty whispered into the silence of the house, barely audible. I heard it too. The whisper went unanswered, but Morty didn't need an answer. He felt a quiet relief, as though speaking the words had planted them in the night itself, where they would be safe. Later, lying in bed, he thought of the stars again, of the hallway with its breathing doors. He thought of the humming, patient and kind, waiting for him in some place beyond sleep. And he knew, even in his smallness, that he was not lost. He was being guided, slowly, gently, towards something he could not yet name. The days that followed seemed ordinary to everyone else. Morty went to school, scribbled in his notebooks, laughed at jokes that didn't always make sense, and came home to the smell of his mom's cooking. But in his heart, everything was different. He carried with him the sense of being watched over, not by anyone in his family, not by his teachers, but by something quieter, something vaster. When he sat by the window at night, he no longer just imagined the stars speaking. He believed it, and believing made the silence inside him feel less like emptiness and more like a companion. He began to notice little things, how his sister's laughter softened when she thought no one was listening, how his mum paused for a moment after saying good night, as if holding back words she didn't know how to say. Morty absorbed these moments like light on water, not always understanding them, but feeling them deeply. He learned that not everything important had to be explained. Some things were simply meant to be held quietly, gently, like his dream, like the stars, like the sigh of his grandfather asleep in the chair. And as the seasons shifted and the world moved on, Morty began to carry within him the first shape of who he would become. Not a hero in the way stories usually tell it, not bold, not grand, not triumphant, but a hero of silence, of patience, of listening. A boy who could hold the strange hum of the universe in his chest and let it guide him softly, step by step, toward all the doors he had yet to open. He didn't know it then, but this was the beginning. A beginning shaped not by explosions or great escapes, but by the stillness of a child who listened when no one else could. The days that followed his first dream of the hallway drifted by like a slow river, unhurried and reflective. Morty did not forget the sensation of the doors breathing, nor the sound of the humming far in the distance. If anything, it grew stronger the more he pretended to live an ordinary life. In the quiet between classes, in the stillness of late afternoons, even in the moments when he laughed with friends, there was always a faint undertone, like music carried beneath the floorboards. It was not distracting, rather it was comforting, reminding him that his life was not only what he could see, but also what whispered just beyond it. One afternoon, he wandered into the garage where Rick spent most of his time. The air was sharp with the smell of metal and oil, the cluttered counters littered with tools and strange devices whose purposes Morty could only guess. Rick didn't notice him at first. He was bent over a contraption that pulsed faint green light. Morty stood in the doorway, hesitant, the same way he had been hesitant with the dream's doors. He wondered whether stepping closer would mean stepping into something he could never step back from. When Rick finally looked up, his eyes, bloodshot but sharp, he said nothing. He only gave Morty a brief glance, a grunt, and turned back to his work. Yet Morty noticed something. Beneath the gruff exterior, beneath the mess and the brilliance, there was a loneliness that mirrored his own. Rick's hands moved with purpose, but his shoulders sagged as though carrying something invisible. Morty could not name it, but he recognized it. It was the same weight he felt when he pressed his hand against the glass at night, waiting for the stars to answer. Quietly, Morty stepped inside, sat on a crate, and watched. He did not ask questions, he simply stayed. And for reasons Morty didn't fully understand, Rick allowed it. No lecture, no dismissal, just silence shared between them, broken only by the hum of machines. That night, Morty dreamt again. He was back in the hallway, though this time the air was warmer, as though the humming had softened the walls themselves. He walked slowly, tracing his fingers along the doors as if they were alive. One door caught his attention. It was slightly ajar, spilling a thin line of golden light. He wanted to open it, to see what lay inside, but his hand trembled before it reached the knob. From behind, he thought he heard a familiar cough, a sound that reminded him of Rick. He turned, but no one was there. The hallway was endless, empty, but for the humming. When he faced the door again, it was closed, sealed tight, as if it had never opened. He woke with a strange ache in his chest, neither joy nor sorrow, but something tangled between them. As dawn filtered through the blinds, Morty lay still, wondering if the dream was guiding him or only teasing him. The humming seemed to follow him even into waking, faint but persistent, like an invitation he was not yet ready to accept. In the days that followed, Morty grew more attuned to small things. The way light shifted in the kitchen when his mother poured her morning coffee, the softness in his sister's voice when she sang to herself, unaware she was being heard. These details did not feel ordinary. They felt like threads, delicate strands connecting him to a tapestry he could not yet see. He began to suspect that the world was not built only of loud moments, the fireworks, the shouts, the victories, but of quiet ones, stitched together with care. One evening, while helping Rick carry boxes from the garage, Morty asked softly, "Do you ever hear something? Like a sound that isn't there?" Rick paused, narrowing his eyes, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. He shrugged, muttered something about tinnitus, and brushed the question aside. But Morty noticed the way his grandfather's hands hesitated for a fraction of a second before returning to their task. It was enough to make Morty believe he wasn't entirely alone in what he heard. That night, unable to sleep, Morty sat by the window again. He pressed his forehead to the glass, letting the coolness seep into his skin. The stars outside seemed unusually close, like watchful companions leaning in to listen. He whispered to them, not words, but feelings, the way one hums a tune without lyrics. He thought of the dream, of Rick's silence, of his mother's quiet pauses, and he let them merge into a single breath. And in that breath, he felt something answer. Not in sound, not in sight, but in presence. As if the universe had leaned back toward him, acknowledging that he too was part of its hidden rhythm. The following morning, Morty carried this quiet certainty with him. The world felt the same, yet different, like a familiar song played in a new key. His steps to school were slower, deliberate. He listened to conversations more carefully, noticing the spaces between words. He began to feel that life was not rushing past him, but unfolding petal by petal in its own time. And within that unfolding, he had a place, not as a leader, not as someone extraordinary, but as someone who could notice, who could hold, who could remember. One afternoon, while walking home, Morty found himself standing before a small shop he had never noticed before. Its sign was faded, the windows dusty, but inside there was the faint smell of bread. Something about it felt like a fragment from his dream, a door half open, waiting. He stepped inside and found a simple counter, shelves lined with sandwiches, wrapped in paper, and a man behind the register humming a low, tuneless melody. Morty froze. The humming, so like the one in his dream, gentle and wordless, wrapped around him like a forgotten lullaby. The man looked up, smiled faintly, and asked what he wanted. Morty couldn't answer. He only stood there, heart swelling, with the strange recognition that he had stumbled into something meant for him. He left with a sandwich he barely tasted, walking home in a haze. The shop felt unreal, like it might vanish if he tried to return. Yet the humming lingered, threading itself into the rhythm of his steps. Morty thought of the hallway again, of the golden light spilling through the door, and wondered if he had just glimpsed a piece of it in the waking world. That night, as he lay in bed, he closed his eyes and listened. The humming was there, soft and steady, not from the stars or his dreams, but from within himself. For the first time he understood the hallway was not a place far away, but a part of him waiting to be walked whenever he was ready. And with that thought, he drifted into sleep, feeling less like a child lost in strange whispers and more like someone slowly learning the language of his own soul. The sandwich shop lingered in Morty's thoughts for days. He tried to go back, once retracing his steps along the same street, past the same houses and lamp-posts, but when he arrived, the shop was gone. Where it had stood before was only a wall of bricks, weathered and dull, as if nothing had ever existed there. Morty stood for a long time, staring, clutching the straps of his backpack with both hands. The smell of bread was gone. The humming was gone. And yet, in some quiet chamber of his memory, it remained. He could still taste the faint sweetness of the sandwich, still hear the wordless tune curling inside his chest. It was not disappointment he felt, but a gentle reminder. Some places were never meant to stay fixed in the world. They came and went like dreams, like clouds, like doors that opened only once. When he returned home that evening, Rick was sprawled on the couch fast asleep, a bottle dangling precariously from his fingers. Morty lingered in the doorway, watching the slow rise and fall of his grandfather's chest. He wondered, not for the first time, if Rick dreamed, and if he did, were his dreams filled with machines, galaxies, and chaos? Or did he, too, sometimes find himself walking down long, quiet hallways, searching for a sound just out of reach? Morty stepped closer, gently took the bottle from Rick's hand, and set it on the table. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of awareness behind Rick's closed eyelids, as though some part of him knew he was being cared for. Morty whispered into the dim room, barely audible even to himself. "You don't have to carry it all alone." That night, the dream returned. The hallway stretched before him, endless and hushed, the walls pulsing with the same faint warmth he had felt before. But this time, instead of wandering, Morty sat down on the floor. He pressed his ear against the wood of one door and listened. At first there was nothing, only the thrum of his own heartbeat. But slowly The humming filled his ears, steady and calm, weaving through him until he couldn't tell if the sound came from the door or from himself. He felt no urge to open it. Instead, he let the music surround him, as if the dream itself were teaching him patience. When he woke, he carried the echo with him into the daylight, softer now, but no less present. School grew into a blur of familiar voices and lessons that seemed to skim across his mind without settling. What held him steady were the small details, the way light filtered through the classroom blinds in slanted lines, the way a friend's pencil tapped nervously against the desk, the way the breeze slipped through the window carrying the smell of grass. Morty noticed it all, collected it quietly, and held it like secret treasures. He began to understand that the world spoke most clearly in these unnoticed moments. Perhaps that was what the humming wanted him to learn, to listen not for answers, but for presence. One afternoon his sister caught him staring at the sky for too long. "What are you even looking at?" she asked, half teasing, half curious. Morty shrugged, fumbling for words. He didn't know how to explain that he wasn't, just looking at clouds, but listening to them, the way they drifted, the way they surrendered to the wind without resistance. She rolled her eyes and went back inside, but Morty smiled faintly. It didn't bother him that she didn't understand. The humming was not something to be explained, it was something to be felt. Rick, too, began to notice Morty's quietness. One evening, while adjusting knobs on a device Morty couldn't name, Rick asked, "What's with the face, kid? You've been walking around like you're hearing voices or something." Morty hesitated, his lips parting, but no words came. How could he explain that he was carrying a song no one else seemed to hear? Rick grunted when Morty stayed silent, muttered something about teenage phases and returned to his machine. But Morty thought he saw, just for a heartbeat, the faintest trace of recognition in his grandfather's eyes, as if Rick, too, had once known the hum and had chosen to bury it beneath science and distraction. That night, Morty didn't dream of hallways. Instead, he dreamed of the sandwich shop. This time, it was alive with warm light, shelves brimming with bread, the air heavy with the smell of flour and honey. The man behind the counter hummed the same tune, but when Morty tried to speak, no words came. He stood there, heart racing, until the man smiled gently, as though he already understood. Then the shop faded again, leaving Morty with the sense that he hadn't lost it, only carried it deeper inside himself. When he woke, he realized the humming no longer came only at night. It followed him into mornings, threading through the sound of dishes in the kitchen, through the murmur of voices in the hallway, through the rustle of leaves as he walked to school. It was not intrusive. It was a companion. He felt less alone, as though the universe had given him a friend that no one could see. Morty began to wonder if this was what people meant when they spoke of growing up, not learning facts or following rules, but discovering quiet truths hidden in the spaces between things. He thought of Rick again, of the way his grandfather built doorways into other worlds. Maybe Morty's gift wasn't so different. While Rick tore open portals with machines, Morty was learning to open doors with silence, with attention, with patience. His journeys didn't require leaving the house. They unfolded in the smallness of everyday life, in the act of listening to what others ignored. One evening, as the family ate dinner, Morty caught his mother staring at her plate a moment. Longer than usual, her fork paused in mid-air. He noticed the sigh she tried to hide, the one no one else seemed to hear. Morty didn't say anything, but he held that sigh gently in his chest, as though keeping it safe. Later, when she kissed him goodnight, he lingered in the embrace just a second longer. She didn't ask why, but Morty knew she felt it, the quiet way he had answered her unspoken sadness. That night, as he drifted into sleep, the humming seemed to swell, surrounding him with warmth. He thought of the hallway again, the doors waiting, the tune guiding him forward. He did not know what lay ahead, but he felt ready, not for battles, not for victories, but for the gentle work of listening, of noticing, of carrying light into places that felt dark. The dream did not come, but Morty didn't need it. For the first time, he understood that the hallway was not something he had to wait for. It lived in him now, in the way he looked at the world, in the way he cared, without words. He was no longer a child stumbling into mysteries. He was beginning to grow into them, slowly, quietly, like a lantern lit from within. Morty carried the quiet glow of his new awareness into the days that followed, as though each morning greeted him not with the blunt strike of an alarm clock, but with a soft hand resting gently on his shoulder. The world still looked the same to everyone else, the sidewalks cracked and uneven, the classrooms filled with half-listened lectures, the television in the living room buzzing faintly even when no one watched. But to Morty, each detail shimmered with a hidden thread. He found himself pausing more often, letting moments stretch just long enough for their subtle edges to reveal themselves. The sigh of wind against the window pane, the way shadows lengthened across the kitchen table, even the sound of his own footsteps returning to him faintly from the walls. All of it carried a meaning he could not fully explain, but felt deeply. One evening, after a long day at school, Morty sat on the porch steps as the sky shifted into twilight. His notebook rested on his knees, pages filled with aimless sketches of doors and stars. He no longer forced himself to draw the way teachers asked, but instead allowed his pencil to drift where it wished. Tonight it traced a series of lines that curved into the outline of a hallway, faintly glowing. When he finished, Morty stared at the image for a long time. He had not meant to draw it. Yet it had appeared on the page as though pulled from him by the same hum he had carried since childhood. The thought that his own hands might already know the path unsettled him, yet also comforted him. He closed the notebook gently, holding it to his chest as the first stars began to appear above. Rick stepped outside then, muttering to himself, the smell of burnt wires clinging to his clothes. He saw Morty sitting there and paused. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Rick lowered himself heavily onto the step beside him, groaning as though the weight of years pressed against his joints. "You're quiet tonight," he said at last, his voice rough but not unkind. Morty shrugged, unsure how to explain that the silence around them felt louder than any conversation. After a pause, Rick leaned back and looked at the sky, his expression unreadable. "You know," he said slowly, "people think the universe is about noise, explosions, discoveries, endless chatter. But most of it's just silence." Morty turned toward him, surprised, but Rick's eyes were still fixed on the darkening heavens. The words hung in the air, heavy and soft, until Rick gave a short laugh that broke the spell. Forget it," he muttered, rising unsteadily to his feet. Yet Morty knew the truth of what had been said, and more than that he knew Rick had felt it too. That night the dream returned, not in the same hallway but in a different place. Morty stood in a field of tall grass, under a sky that seemed too wide, too full of stars. The air was alive with whispers, threads of the same humming woven together until they became something vast. He walked slowly, the blades brushing against his arms, the ground warm beneath his bare feet. In the distance, A single lantern glowed, swinging gently as though someone carried it. He moved toward it, but the closer he came, the further it seemed to drift, always a little out of reach. He did not feel frustration, only the steady pull of something waiting. When he woke, his chest still carried the rhythm of the dream, as though he had breathed the stars themselves into his lungs. The following day, Morty noticed a shift in how he related to others. His sister, who often filled the house with sharp words, dropped a plate by accident. For a moment she looked ready to snap, but Morty bent down quietly, picking up the largest piece and handing it to her without a word. She froze, then muttered a soft "thanks" before hurrying away. His mother, weary from the day, left her coffee untouched on the counter. Morty moved it closer to her hand without her noticing, and when she finally sipped it, she smiled faintly, unaware that the gesture had been deliberate. These small acts felt guided, as though the hum inside him nudged him toward what others needed before they asked. Morty realized then that his gift was not about knowing answers, but about listening deeply enough to hear the questions no one spoke aloud. Rick, however, remained an enigma. Some nights Morty caught him staring into the garage wall as though it were a horizon only he could see. Other times he buried himself in his machines, muttering equations under his breath. Morty wanted to ask if Rick had ever heard the same humming, but fear held him back, the fear that Rick would dismiss it, turn it into another lesson about physics and probability, stripping away the mystery that Morty treasured. And yet he sensed an unspoken connection, a tether, invisible but present, linking his quiet patience to Rick's restless searching. One evening, Morty gathered the courage to say something, though not directly. As Rick adjusted a glowing dial on the workbench, Morty said softly, "Sometimes I think silence is saying more than we think." Rick's hand stilled, his shoulders stiffening. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the hum of the machine. Then Rick sighed without looking up and muttered, "You're not wrong, kid." Morty felt the words settle inside him like an anchor, proof that his experience was not just his own. That night he dreamt of the hallway again, and this time the door that had once glowed faintly with golden light stood before him. It was still closed, but as Morty approached, he realized he no longer needed to open it. The door itself was enough, a reminder that some mysteries are meant to remain sealed until their time arrives. He placed his hand gently on the wood, feeling its warmth pulse back into him, and whispered, "I'm ready, whenever you are." The humming swelled softly, like a lullaby, and the dream dissolved into a calm darkness that followed him into waking. In the morning, Morty rose with a new steadiness. The world no longer felt like something rushing past him, but something unfolding in rhythm with his breath. Each detail, the creak of floorboards, the flicker of sunlight through curtains, the sound of Rick's footsteps in the hallway, felt like part of a greater harmony. Morty carried his notebook to the porch again, opening it to the page with the sketch of the hallway. This time, he did not add doors or stars. Instead, he drew a single lantern, its light spilling softly outward. When he finished, he closed the book and smiled faintly, knowing that the journey was not about rushing forward, but about learning to see what was already glowing inside him. The days that followed carried with them a kind of quiet anticipation, as if the air itself had begun to wait for something. Morty could feel it pressing at the edges of his awareness, subtle but insistent, like the hush before a storm that never quite arrived. He walked through his routines as though moving inside a current, noticing how everything seemed to align in small, delicate ways. His footsteps often fell in rhythm with the ticking of clocks, His words, when spoken softly, reached
people at just the right moment to ease their tension.
even the way the sunlight struck the floor seemed to guide him forward, as though the world itself leaned gently in his direction. Rick noticed the change, though he said nothing. His glances lingered a little longer, his gruff mutterings softened.
At their edges, Morty could sense the unspoken weight in his grandfather's silence. Rick had always been a man of explanations, of diagrams, equations, and sharp-edged truths, but lately there were pauses in his speech, moments where he seemed
almost reluctant to reduce everything into numbers. Morty wondered if Rick, in his own way, recognized the same threads that Morty now felt weaving through every corner of his life. One night, Morty found himself unable to sleep. The hum in his chest pulsed too strongly, urging him awake. He rose, quietly from his bed, the floorboards groaning beneath his bare feet, and drifted toward the window. Outside, the sky was wide and star-filled, stretching into silence. For a long moment, Morty simply breathed, his reflection mingling with the dark glass until it seemed as though he were peering into another world. Then, faintly, he heard movement. From below, the clink of glass, the soft scrape of metal. He knew immediately that Rick was in the garage again. Morty hesitated, then followed the pull of the moment, padding down the stairs and across the hallway. The door to the garage was cracked open, a thin band of light spilling across the floor. He pushed it open carefully. Rick was hunched over the workbench, not working, but staring at a small device in his hand, its glow faint and blue. His expression was unguarded, almost weary. Morty stepped closer without speaking. Rick didn't turn, but his voice broke the silence. You ever feel like there's something out there you're supposed to understand, but it just keeps slipping through your
fingers?
The question startled Morty, not because of what it meant, but because of the way Rick asked it. There was no sharpness in his tone, no mocking edge, only a quiet honesty. Morty swallowed, then nodded slowly, even though Rick hadn't looked
at him. Yeah, he whispered. All the time, for a moment, they both stood in the same stillness, connected not by words, but by the simple admission of what they carried.
Rick set the device down with a sigh, then finally turned his gaze toward Morty. His eyes were tired, shadowed by years Morty could not fully imagine, yet there was something else there too. An acknowledgement, perhaps even a recognition. Don't
lose that kid, Rick said softly, almost as if to himself. The not knowing, it's the only thing that makes it worth chasing. Morty felt the words settle deep within him, not as an answer, but as a guide. He realized then that
Rick, for all his brilliance and relentless searching, lived in the same space of mystery. Perhaps the difference was that Rick fought it, while Morty had begun to lean into it. That night, when Morty finally drifted into sleep, the dream returned once more. He was back in the field of tall grass, the lantern flickering ahead of him. But this time, he was not alone. A figure stood at the edge of the field, half in shadow, watching. Morty could not make out its face, but he felt no fear. Only the sense that the presence had always been there, waiting for him to notice. The figure raised a hand, pointing toward the horizon where the grass ended, and a vast expanse of water shimmered under the starlight. Morty turned to follow the gesture, and when he looked back, the figure was gone. The lantern, too, had vanished, leaving only the quiet hum of the unseen. He woke with the image of the horizon burned into his mind. For the first time, the dream did not feel like a message to decipher, but a direction to move toward. He carried this with him the next morning, his gaze lingering on the spaces where earth met sky, where endings became beginnings. In the days that followed, Morty began to write more often, not just sketches of doors or lanterns, but words, fragments of thoughts, pieces of the hum translated onto the page. He wrote about silence, about thresholds, about the spaces between breaths, where meaning hides. Sometimes the words made little sense to him, yet he felt lighter after placing them down, as if releasing something that did not belong only to him. He never showed the notebook to anyone, not even Rick, though he wondered if Rick would understand more than he let on. One afternoon, Rick caught Morty staring too long at the horizon from the porch. "Careful with that," he said with a dry chuckle. "You keep looking out there too long, and you'll start seeing things that ain't meant to be seen." Morty turned to him, curious. "Like what?" Rick shrugged, his mouth twisting into a half smile. "Answers." Then he walked back inside, leaving Morty with the weight of the word hanging in the air. That evening, Morty returned to his notebook and wrote a single line at the top of a blank page. "Some doors aren't meant to be opened yet. Some are meant to remind you that waiting is part of the path." He stared at the words until they blurred, then closed the book, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. The hum within him had not faded. If anything, it grew steadier, like a heartbeat, aligning with the rhythm of the world itself. Morty, no longer, felt as though he was waiting for something to arrive from outside. He understood that what he carried had always been within him, guiding him gently forward. The lantern, the horizon, the figure in the dream, all of it was less about reaching a destination and more about learning how to listen deeply enough to move with what was already unfolding. Rick, in his own way, seemed to sense the shift. No longer asked Morty why he sat in silence for so long or why he filled notebooks with half-finished sketches. Instead, he let the boy exist in that space, watching with an expression that Morty could not fully decipher. There was pride in it, perhaps, or maybe just the faint relief of knowing that someone else had begun to hear the same silence he had carried for so long. As another night fell and Morty lay awake, staring at the ceiling, he felt no impatience,
No urgency. The dream would return when it wished, the door would open when it was time, and the horizon would stretch forward whether he reached it or not.
For now, it was enough to know that he was walking in rhythm with something vast and unseen, and that even Rick, in his restless searching, had begun to walk beside him in that silence. The air had grown heavier in recent days, though nothing in the world outside had changed enough to explain it. Morty carried it in his chest like a hidden weight, steady but insistent, a reminder that something waited just beyond his reach. Rick, too, seemed more withdrawn, though not in the way Morty had come to expect. There was less of the frantic energy that usually pulled his grandfather from project to project, and more of a deliberate stillness, as though Rick himself had begun listening to the same silence Morty had been learning to trust. Their conversations, when they came, were sparse but sharp, each word carrying a resonance that lingered long after. One evening, as twilight stretched thin across the horizon, Morty found himself once more by the window. The familiar pull guided his gaze toward the line where earth gave way to sky. He thought of the dream's horizon, the one shimmering with impossible light, the one the shadowed figure had pointed toward, and a quiet certainty formed inside him. He could no longer think of these dreams as accidents or as fragments of imagination. They carried with them a rhythm that aligned with the pulse of his days, a pattern too deliberate to ignore. That night, the dream returned, stronger than before. Morty stood again in the field of tall grass, though this time the wind was fiercer, bending the stalks in waves that rolled toward the unseen sea ahead. The lantern no longer burned, yet he didn't feel lost. Instead, the starlight above was brighter, guiding him. The figure appeared again closer than before, its form clearer though still indistinct. It raised its hand, not in a gesture of direction this time, but in something closer to invitation, beckoning him forward. Morty felt his chest tighten with anticipation. He stepped toward it, the grass whispering against his legs. But just as he neared, the dream fractured into silence, and he woke with his heart racing, the echo of movement still tingling in his hands. The following morning, Morty carried the dream with him like an unfinished sentence. He wanted to tell Rick, yet part of him hesitated. Some truths, he felt, needed to be protected until they could be fully understood. So instead he wrote the
experience down in his notebook, sketching the figure's outline as best as he could.
It was strange. His hand moved as if it remembered details his mind had not consciously seen, tracing shapes that felt familiar, even though he could not explain why. When he looked at the page, something in him shivered. Rick caught him later, hunched over the notebook. "Still drawing your cryptic doodles?" Rick asked, his tone light but not mocking. Morty closed the book quickly, embarrassed, but Rick's eyes lingered on him, sharp yet unreadable. After a pause, Rick added, "Careful, Morty. Sometimes staring too long at the things you don't understand means they start staring back." Morty wanted to brush the comment off, but it stuck with him. That night, when he tried to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that the figure from his dreams wasn't only waiting for him within that hidden horizon. It was aware of him, even now watching across the thin veil between waking and dreaming. He turned over restlessly, but the sensation didn't fade. The days unfolded with a strange symmetry. Small coincidences seemed to multiply, voices echoing his unspoken thoughts, objects appearing where he needed them, even the timing of footsteps aligning perfectly with his own. The hum in his chest had grown steady enough that Morty no longer questioned its presence. He had begun to accept it as part of him, something as natural as his heartbeat. Yet with each passing day, a quiet tension built, as though the unseen rhythm was guiding him toward an inevitable crossing. It came one evening when Rick called Morty into the garage without his usual gruffness. The boy found his grandfather sitting not at his workbench, but at the far side of the room, where a small, dusty trunk sat half buried under tarps and forgotten scraps of machinery. Rick looked tired, his hands resting on his knees, a bottle of untouched liquor beside him. "Morty," he said quietly, "there's something you should see." He pulled the tarp away, revealing the trunk, its surface etched with symbols Morty didn't recognize. The moment Morty laid eyes on it, the hum within him surged, stronger than ever, as though resonating with the thing before him. His pulse quickened, his breath catching in his throat. Rick noticed, his brow furrowing, but he said nothing at first. Instead, he ran a hand across the lid and muttered, "Been keeping this locked up for years. Didn't think anyone else would." "Well, doesn't matter. You're hearing it too, aren't you?" Morty's throat went dry, but he managed a small nod. The admission seemed to weigh heavily between them. Rick exhaled, long and low, before continuing. "I don't know where it came from. I don't even remember the first time I found it. Feels like it's always been here, just waiting. And for some reason, it feels like it's meant for you." The words struck Morty with both wonder and unease. He wanted to ask what was inside, but part of him already knew the answer wasn't simple. Rick didn't open the trunk that night. Instead, he placed a hand on Morty's shoulder, something rare and grounding, and said, "Don't rush it. Some doors only open when you're ready." That night, Morty dreamed again. This time, The figure in the field stood right beside the horizon, its hand resting lightly on what looked like the edge of a massive, unseen door. The sea shimmered. Behind it, vast and infinite, its surface shifting with starlight. Morty felt the hum within him rise to a crescendo, and for the first time he heard a faint sound threading through it, a voice, low and distant, not in words, but in something deeper, like the echo of meaning itself. The figure turned its head, slightly, and though Morty still could not see its face, he felt certain it was waiting for him to step closer, waiting for him to choose. He woke with tears on his cheeks, though he couldn't say why. The morning light streamed softly through his window, and Morty sat for a long while, staring at his hands. The hum was steady now, undeniable, and he knew the path ahead was no longer just a matter of dreams. The horizon had begun to bleed into waking life, and the trunk in Rick's garage stood as a silent threshold, waiting for him to decide when to cross. The morning after the dream weighed differently on Morty, as though every detail of the waking world had been tinted by what he had seen. The trunk in the garage seemed to exist in two places at once, here, in the dust and shadows of Rick's workshop, and also in that dream horizon where the figure had lingered by the great invisible door. Morty could not separate the two in his mind. They were threads of the same pattern converging towards something he could feel but not yet name. He tried to distract himself with the ordinary routines of the day, but the hum inside him no longer allowed for distraction. At breakfast, even the sound of the clock ticking on the wall seemed to match its rhythm, each second beating against his chest like a summons. Rick sat across from him, unusually quiet, sipping his coffee without the usual muttered commentary about the universe's stupidity. Morty wondered if Rick, too, felt the weight of what they had uncovered, but he didn't dare ask. It felt as though speaking it aloud too soon might shatter the fragile thread pulling them forward. By late afternoon, Morty found himself drifting into the garage again. The trunk sat exactly where Rick had left it, its etched symbols faintly catching the light that filtered in through the small, high window. He crouched beside it, running his fingers over the carvings. They were colder than the surrounding metal, their grooves too precise to have been scratched by hand. The moment his fingertips brushed against one of the deeper lines, the hum inside him surged, vibrating through bone and marrow until he had to clench his teeth to keep from gasping aloud. The sensation wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, like standing too close to a storm. He pulled his hand back quickly, heart racing. For a long moment he simply stared, breathing hard, half expecting the trunk to shift or open on its own. It didn't, but the silence around it had deepened, carrying with it a strange awareness. He had no doubt now, whatever lived inside the dreams was bound to this object and to him. Rick's voice came from behind, startling him. "You touched
It, didn't you?" Morty turned sharply to see his grandfather leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, face shadowed by the dim light.
Morty swallowed hard but didn't answer. Rick sighed, pushing himself forward with the slow weariness of someone carrying knowledge too long. "Don't lie, Morty. That thing, it reacts to people. Not everyone, though. I've tried to figure it out. Years of tests, experiments, theories."
"Nothing. But you—" He gestured vaguely toward Morty, his voice roughening. "It sings for you," Morty blinked, unsettled by the choice of word. "Sings?" he echoed. Rick gave a humorless chuckle. "That hum you feel? That rhythm? I can't hear it. Never have. But I can see it in your eyes, the way you vibrate around it. Whatever it is, it's waiting for you, not me." The idea filled Morty with both dread and a quiet sense of inevitability. He wanted to argue, to push the responsibility away, but the truth was undeniable.
The dreams, the hum, the figure by the horizon, all of it had been leading here. He managed a shaky, "What if I'm not ready?" Rick's expression softened, if only a fraction. Nobody ever is. Readiness is a myth, Morty. You just step through when the door shows up. He hesitated, then added, "But you don't have to do it alone. Not unless you choose to." The words lingered in Morty's mind long after Rick left him with the trunk. That night, when sleep finally claimed him, he found himself once again in the field. The figure stood closer than ever, its hand now resting firmly on the edge of that unseen door. The horizon shimmered brighter, and the sea's glow pulsed like a heartbeat. The figure lifted its hand, mirroring Rick's earlier gesture, offering choice rather than command. Morty's chest tightened with the weight of understanding. This was not about being ready. It was about answering a call that had already been written into him. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. As he drew near, the air shifted. The hum inside him grew deafening, no longer confined to his chest, but resonating through the entire dreamscape. The figure tilted its head as though listening, then slowly pressed its hand against the invisible seam in the horizon. The sky trembled, splitting faintly along a line of radiant light. Morty raised his hand without thinking, placing it beside the figure's. The seam widened, spilling brilliance across the field, and for a moment Morty thought he could see shapes beyond it, vast, shifting landscapes, colors he had no names for, and something deeper still, like the echo of countless voices whispering in unison. But before he could cross, the dream shuddered violently. The light flickered, the horizon folding back on itself, and Morty woke with a cry, clutching his chest as the hum still roared inside him. Sweat drenched his skin, his breaths ragged. Yet even in the disorientation, he knew something had changed. The door was no longer just a symbol in his dreams. It had begun to open. The next day, Rick found him pale and quiet, staring out the window as though the horizon outside held the same fissure. Rick sat beside him without speaking for a long while, letting the silence stretch between them. Finally, Morty whispered, "It's opening." Rick didn't ask what he meant. His jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on some memory Morty couldn't see. "Then it's only a matter of time," Rick murmured, almost to himself. "The question is, what's on the other side, and whether you'll come back the same." Morty turned his head, meeting Rick's eyes, and for the first time he felt the strange balance of their roles shift. He wasn't just the one being led anymore. He was the one standing at the threshold, with Rick watching from behind. And though fear trembled in his veins, there was also a clarity that hadn't existed before. The horizon was no longer just a dream. It was a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Morty couldn't shake the weight of that vision. Even through the bright haze of day, the memory of the dream clung to him like damp air, heavy and inescapable. He felt the pull constantly now, a low thrum beneath his ribs, dragging his attention back to the trunk, no matter how hard he tried to focus elsewhere. It wasn't imagination anymore, not some fleeting nightmare that faded with the morning light. It was real, and each passing hour seemed to draw him closer to it. Rick noticed, of course, and he always noticed. By evening, Morty caught his grandfather watching him with that piercing, calculating stare, the kind that cut through every excuse Morty might try to make. Rick didn't ask if Morty had dreamed again. He didn't need to. Instead, he poured himself another drink and muttered, "You're not going to let this sit, are you?" Morty hesitated before shaking his head. It's not just me, Rick. Something's happening. I saw it open. Just for a second, I felt it. His voice cracked as he admitted it, and he hated the vulnerability in his tone, but Rick didn't laugh or mock him the way he usually did. Rick set the glass down hard enough that the sound echoed through the cluttered workshop. Then we stopped waiting. He stood, brushing the crumbs of some long-forgotten meal from his lab coat, and nodded toward the trunk. If the door's opening on its own, we either deal with it now, together, or we let it eat you alive piece by piece.
Until there's nothing left.
The words made Morty's stomach twist. He wasn't ready, he knew that, but Rick had already told him readiness was a lie. And he also knew that if he turned away now, the dreams would only tighten around him, suffocating him, until he had no choice left at all. So, with trembling fingers, Morty rose and followed Rick into the heart of the garage. The trunk loomed larger than ever, though it hadn't moved an inch. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light, as if responding to Morty's nearness. Rick crouched down beside it, pulling tools from the workbench, strange instruments Morty didn't recognize, things that looked part mechanical and part organic, wires curling like veins. He muttered equations under his breath, diagrams and theories spilling out half-coherently as he set up devices around the trunk. Morty tried to distract himself by watching, but his eyes kept pulling back to the symbols. They weren't just carvings anymore. They pulsed faintly, each groove a channel for the hum that was now vibrating in time with his heartbeat. He reached out without thinking, his fingertips hovering just above the cold metal. "Don't touch it yet," Rick snapped sharply, dragging Morty back to himself. "You're the key, kid, but if you jump in before I stabilize it, we might both end up erased, or worse." He adjusted a dial on one of his machines, and a low frequency filled the room, harmonizing with the hum Morty felt inside him. The air thickened, pressing against Morty's skin like invisible hands. Morty swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. What's on the other side, Rick?" Rick paused, his hands stilling for a fraction of a second. Then he muttered, "Depends who or what built it. Could be a prison, could be a beacon, could be a door that was never meant to open at all. The only thing I know for sure is that you're tied to it, Morty. That makes it our problem whether—"
"I like it or not." The honesty in his voice chilled Morty more than any nightmare.
He wanted to back away, to retreat into the safety of ignorance, but the trunk's pull had become unbearable. Every breath he took was in rhythm with the symbol's silent song. He knew that if he didn't face it now, he never would. Rick finished his preparations and stood, wiping sweat from his forehead. "All right. When I give the word, put your hand on it. Not before, not after. Timing matters. If this thing's been waiting centuries to open, we can't afford to be sloppy." He took a deep breath, steadying himself, then activated the array of devices. The room shuddered as waves of invisible energy rippled outward. The symbols flared with light, casting the garage into shifting patterns of shadow. The hum inside Morty became deafening, a chorus that filled every corner of his body. Rick shouted over the sound, "Now, Morty! Touch it!" Morty's hand slammed against the trunk. The moment his skin met the etched surface, a surge of energy shot through.
Him, throwing his vision into chaos.
The garage dissolved around him, and for an instant he stood once more in the dream field, the horizon splitting open before him, the figure waiting silently at its edge. But this time it wasn't a dream. He felt the cold wind against his face, smelled the sharp tang of ozone in the air. The seam in the horizon widened with a crack of thunder, spilling impossible light into the field. The figure lifted its hand, gesturing for him to step closer. Morty stumbled forward, his body moving without his command. Behind him, faintly, he could hear Rick's voice, distant, distorted, shouting warnings he couldn't fully grasp. The hum swallowed everything else, drawing him toward the door. He placed his hand against the crack in the sky, and light exploded outward, blinding him. For a heartbeat, he saw everything, endless landscapes, impossible geometries twisting against one another, voices singing in a language that was both alien and achingly familiar. He felt himself dissolving into it, every boundary of his body unraveling. Then with a violent snap, he was thrown back. He gasped awake, sprawled on the garage floor, the trunk smoking faintly beside him. Rick hovered over him, face pale, hands trembling despite his effort to hide it. "Morty! Answer me, damn it!" Morty coughed, his chest heaving, the hum still echoing faintly inside him. His eyes met Rick's, wide and terrified, but also filled with something else, an awareness he hadn't carried before. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Rick, it's not just a door, it's alive!" Rick froze, his expression flickering, with something Morty had never seen on him before. Pure fear. Rick's fear was the first thing Morty registered. Not the ache in his limbs or the faint ringing in his skull, but the look on his grandfather's face. It wasn't the usual irritated scowl or the detached frown Rick wore when something didn't add up. It was raw, unguarded fear, the kind Morty had never seen him show before. For a moment, that alone scared Morty more than whatever he'd just witnessed beyond the door. Rick forced himself to stand straighter, hiding it behind gruffness, but Morty caught the tremor in his voice.
"Alive? Morty, are you sure? You're not just rattled? Sometimes brains invent meaning when they're overloaded." But Morty shook his head, words tumbling out faster than he could control. "No, Rick, I felt it. It wasn't just a place. It saw me. It wanted me." His breath hitched as the memory surged, fragments of impossible images still lingering at the edges of his mind. The door isn't just a door. It's like it's waiting for something, for me.
Rick cursed under his breath, turning back to his instruments. Half of them were smoking, sparks fizzing against the metal floor. He shut them down with a few hurried motions, but his hands shook again. "If you're right, Morty, then we didn't. Just open a door, we woke it up. And things that old, that big, they don't wake up without reason." Morty sat up slowly, his body still aching from the surge, but the hum inside him had softened into a low pulse. It was like a second heartbeat, steady, constant, reminding him that the connection hadn't broken. Even now, with the trunk closed, and inert beside them, he felt tethered to it, unable to escape. Rick lit a cigarette with unsteady fingers, exhaling smoke like it might disguise his unease. "This complicates things," he muttered. "Alive means intelligent. Intelligent means intent. And intent means it might have been waiting for you longer than you've been alive." The thought made Morty's skin crawl. "Why me? Why?"
"Not you? You're the genius, Rick. You mess with doors and universes all the time. Why is it picking me?" Rick avoided his gaze, staring at the glowing tip of the cigarette. "Some locks need keys that aren't made of metal or—"
"Equations, Morty. Sometimes they're made of bloodlines. Or resonance." His voice grew quieter. "It's not about brains, it's about fit. And for whatever cosmic joke of a reason, you're it." Morty tried to laugh, tried to deny it, but the sound caught in his throat. Deep down, he knew Rick was right. He'd felt the door pull him in, mold itself around him. It hadn't wanted Rick, it had wanted him. For the next few minutes, silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of cooling machines. Morty thought it was over, that maybe they'd contained it for now. But then the garage lights flickered, dimming for a breath before, flaring back to life. The air thickened again, carrying the faint echo of that impossible song. Rick snapped upright.
"It's not done." He grabbed Morty's shoulder, hauling him to his feet. "Get up. If it's active, even with the trunk closed, that means it doesn't need us to open anymore. It can reach." Morty froze, his mouth dry. "Reach? Reach where?" Rick's jaw tightened. "Here." The word hit like a blow.
Before Morty could respond, the shadows in the corner of the garage stirred, rippling unnaturally as if the light couldn't touch them. A faint crack appeared in the air itself, jagged and glowing, widening with a sound like tearing fabric. Through it, Morty glimpsed fragments of the field from his visions, the horizon already splitting again. The figure was there too, but clearer now. It didn't stand distant this time. It leaned forward, pressing against the seam, its outline distorted by the unstable light. No face, no features, only a shifting silhouette that radiated intent. And even without a mouth, Morty swore he heard it whisper his name. Panic surged through him, but his legs wouldn't move. The hum inside his chest had risen into a fevered beat, syncing perfectly with the widening crack. The tether tugged harder than ever before, urging him closer. Rick stepped between Morty and the tier, raising one of his modified weapons. "Back off!" he barked, firing a blast of energy into the rift. The shot struck, flaring bright, but instead of sealing it, the crack only shuddered and grew wider. The figure leaned further through, its arms stretching unnaturally as if space itself bent to accommodate it. Morty stumbled back, clutching his chest.
"Rick, it wants me! It's not stopping!" Rick grabbed him roughly, forcing his eyes away from the figure. "Then don't give it what it wants. Listen to me, Morty. Doors are two-way streets. If it's alive, that means it's bound."
By rules. We just have to figure out what rules it plays by before it drags you through. But Morty couldn't hear much beyond the pounding of his second heartbeat. The whisper grew louder, a chorus now, promising things he didn't understand, but felt drawn to nonetheless. His fear twisted into a dangerous fascination, the same pull that had made him touch the trunk in the first place. The figure's hand pressed against the rift, its fingers stretching out, almost reaching the garage floor. Reality bent under its touch, warping the space around it like heat haze. Rick cursed, yanking Morty back and throwing another barrage of energy into the seam. Sparks rained down, the machines screeching in protest, but the rift still widened. For one terrible moment, Morty thought it would break fully open again, that the garage would be swallowed whole. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the rift snapped shut with a thunderclap. The shadows fell still, the light returned, and the hum inside Morty dimmed back to its steady pulse. Both of them stood frozen, breathing hard. Rick's weapon hissed with smoke, his hands trembling more visibly now. Morty's chest still burned, the whisper echoing faintly like an aftertaste. Rick didn't look at him at first. He just stared at the empty corner where the rift had been. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, grim. "It's awake, and now it knows where you are." Morty swallowed hard, his throat dry. "What do we do?" Rick stubbed out his cigarette, his expression hardening like steel around the fear he couldn't quite hide. "We prepare. Because next time, Morty, it won't stop at just reaching." The hum inside Morty's chest answered with a steady, knowing beat. Rick worked with the intensity of a man who knew time had already started running out. The garage became a blur of clattering metal, sparks, and muttered curses as he tore through shelves and boxes, dragging out devices Morty had never seen before. Some looked like weapons, others like cages made of shimmering glass, and a few pulsed with lights that seemed alive themselves. Morty sat on a stool nearby, the hum in his chest still steady, like a reminder he couldn't shut off. He watched Rick without speaking at first, afraid his voice might break the fragile concentration holding his grandfather together. But after what felt like an eternity of silence broken only by the whir of machines, Morty finally spoke. "Rick."
It's not just awake, is it? It's coming. Rick didn't look up, his hands busy soldering a component into what looked like a portable generator laced with glowing veins. You're not wrong, Morty. It's awake. It knows your resonance.
And it's already sniffing at the walls. The only reason it hasn't burst through yet is because it's probing, testing us. Next time it won't hesitate. The words landed heavy, but they weren't what shook Morty most. It was Rick's tone. For once, he wasn't mocking or dismissive. He sounded resigned, like he'd been expecting this day in some form. Morty leaned forward, gripping his knees. "You've seen something like this before, haven't you? You've been acting like you know more than you're saying." Rick froze for a fraction of a second before resuming his work, a little too quickly. "I've seen patterns, Morty. Echoes. I've read things older than universes and chased phenomena across timelines. And every now and then, I stumbled across mentions of doors like this, gateways that weren't built, but born. They're alive, patient, and they wait for connections." Morty's stomach dropped. "Connections like me." Rick finally glanced at him, his eyes bloodshot but sharp. "Bingo." He dropped the tool and rubbed his face. "Look, Morty, some of these doors latch onto certain people. Not everyone, not randomly. It's like a keyhole looking for a key. You just happen to be the unlucky bastard whose frequency matches this one." Morty's chest throbbed, the hum answering in quiet agreement. He pressed his hand against it like he could silence it, but the vibration only deepened under his palm. "So what, Rick? I'm doomed? There's nothing we can do?" Rick slammed a device onto the workbench harder than necessary. "Don't."
Say that. I'm not letting some cosmic parasite eat my grandson. We're going to fight this thing, Morty, but we need to be smart about it.
His voice cracked just slightly, and Morty heard the edge of desperation behind the bravado. He wanted to believe him. He really did. But even as Rick spoke, Morty could still hear faint whispers curling at the edge of his thoughts, soft and persuasive. The figure's presence hadn't left, it lingered, patient, like it knew time was on its side. Hours passed in feverish preparation. Rick built, rewired, and recalibrated, explaining in bursts of sharp clarity as he worked. This will dampen the resonance, make it harder for the door to lock onto you.
These, he gestured at a rack of glowing rods, are stabilizers. If the rift opens again, we can pin it, stop it from expanding. And this, he held up something that looked like a cross between a cannon and a tuning fork. This is,
for me, a last resort. Morty's eyes widened. Last resort? What does that mean? Rick met his gaze without flinching. It means if it tries to take you, I'll drag the whole damn thing into collapse before I let it win. The weight of the words silenced Morty. He wanted to argue, to tell Rick he couldn't just sacrifice himself, but deep down, he knew better. Rick wasn't bluffing. If pushed, he'd burn everything, himself included, to keep Morty from being consumed. By the time the preparations were finished, the garage barely looked like itself. It was layered in glowing grids, humming machines, and strange pylons that flickered with unseen energy. Rick finally slumped into a chair, drained but refusing to close his eyes. Morty sat opposite him, the silence between them stretching taut.
Hum in his chest broke it first. It surged suddenly, violently, like a drumbeat that rattled his bones. Morty gasped, clutching at his sternum. Rick snapped upright, every muscle tensing. "Morty! It's stronger," Morty stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's pulling, harder than before. Rick, I don't think the dampeners are working." Before Rick could respond, the lights flickered again. The machines around them whined in unison, as if something pressed against their limits.
The shadows in the garage thickened, and the temperature dropped. Rick was already moving, switching on the stabilizers. Blue rods of light shot upward, forming a shaky grid around the center of the room. "Stay inside the field," he barked. Morty staggered toward the middle, but the hum fought him, tugging his body toward the corner where the rift had opened before. His feet dragged against the floor as though unseen strings pulled them. And then it came. The air tore open with a deafening crack, the rift exploding wider than before. The figure was clearer now, its shape massive and fluid, constantly shifting but always leaning closer, reaching. The whisper wasn't a whisper anymore, it was a voice, deep and resonant, vibrating in Morty's skull. "Key," it said. "Come." Morty fell to his knees, the resonance inside him synchronizing so perfectly with the voice that it hurt. He wanted to resist, to scream, but the pull was intoxicating, wrapping around his will like chains. Rick fired the
cannon. The sound ripped through the garage, a violent wave of energy slamming into the rift. The figure reeled, its outline distorting, the tear in space quivering. But it didn't close.
It fought back, pressing harder, its arm breaching further into the garage than before. The stabilizers sparked wildly, struggling to hold the grid. Rick gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down his face as he adjusted dials and fired again. "Stay with me, Morty. Don't listen to it." But Morty could barely hear him. The voice had drowned out everything, filling his head with visions of that endless horizon, the broken field, the promise of belonging. His chest burned, his heartbeat aligning perfectly with the figure's rhythm. For one terrifying second, he wanted to step forward, to give in. Then Rick's hand clamped onto his shoulder, grounding him. His grandfather's voice cut through the storm, raw and desperate. "Morty, you're not a key, you're my grandson." "Don't let it rewrite that." Morty blinked, the words slicing through the fog. He gasped, clawing against the pull, his nails digging into the floor. The stabilizers flared one last time, blasting arcs of light that wrapped around the rift. The figure howled, not with sound, but with vibration that rattled the walls. And then, with a violent snap, the tier sealed shut. Silence slammed down, the machines hissed and smoked, the stabilizers shattered, and Rick collapsed to one knee, coughing hard. Morty lay flat on the floor, trembling, the hum inside him weaker now but still present, like an ember that refused to die. Rick dragged himself upright, staggering over to Morty. He helped him sit, his hands surprisingly gentle. "You did it."
"Morty, you fought it," Morty's voice cracked. "It's not gone, Rick. It's still in me, waiting." Rick's eyes darkened, but he forced a smirk.
"Then we'll keep it waiting, forever if we have to." But Morty saw the truth in his eyes. Rick didn't believe it could be held back forever. And neither did Morty. Rick sat slumped against the smoking workbench, his lab coat torn and stained, the acrid stench of burnt circuitry hanging heavy in the garage. The machines were silent now, some sparking faintly as they died, others reduced to twisted scraps. The stabilizers were gone, nothing left but scorched rods and cracked glass, and the hum of the dimensional field was absent. For a brief, fragile
moment, silence held. Morty sat hunched on the floor, his back pressed against the wall, his breath sharp and uneven.
His body trembled as though the vibration still ran through his bones, and when he pressed his hand against his chest, he felt the faint echo, weaker but constant, like a second heartbeat pulsing beneath his own. He looked up at Rick, his eyes
wide and wet with fear. It's still there, Rick. I can feel it. It didn't leave, it just pulled back.
Rick rubbed his forehead with shaking fingers, reaching for the flask in his pocket but finding it empty. He tossed it aside with a bitter laugh that lacked any real humor. Yeah, Morty, that wasn't a win, that was a delay. And things like this don't give up, they just wait for a crack big enough to slip through again. The weight of his words settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Morty wanted to believe Rick had a plan, that he'd built enough devices, enough weapons, to fight it off forever. But the way Rick's shoulders sagged told another story. He had fought with everything he had, and still the thing had reached. Into their world, nearly tearing Morty away. Morty's voice came out small. So what happens now? Do we just sit here and wait for it to come back? Rick turned to him, and for once his eyes didn't carry the sharp glint of arrogance or the haze of intoxication. They carried something deeper, rawer, fear. No,
Morty, we don't wait. We dig. We find out what the hell this thing is, where it comes from, and how to kill it at the root. Because if we don't, it's not just you it's going to take. It's going to keep pulling until it drags everything
through. Morty shivered, remembering the glimpse of that horizonless place beyond the rift, the endless fields and the figures shifting shape. He had felt how vast it was, how ancient. To call it a monster felt too small. It was a presence, a force, and Morty wasn't sure it could even be killed. Rick limped back to the table, sweeping away broken scraps to clear a space. He pulled out an old console, its screen cracked, its wiring frayed, but its core intact. This thing doesn't just pick doors at random, there's a pattern. If it's picked you, Morty, it means it's done it before.
Somewhere, somewhen, there are records, traces, and if there's a pattern, there's a weakness. The console whirred faintly as Rick forced it to life, flickering green light spilling across his worn face. Morty edged closer, still hugging
himself, listening as Rick typed furiously. Data streamed across the screen, coordinates, dimensional records, signals caught at the edge of space and time. For a moment, Morty thought he was watching nonsense, just static and noise. But then the console beeped sharply, locking onto something. A faint signal pulsed across the display, jagged, rhythmic, almost like the same vibration Morty felt in his chest. There, Rick muttered, leaning in. You see that? That's
resonance, not yours. Another one. Which means this has happened before. Morty's breath caught. So, someone else was like me? Rick nodded grimly. Someone or something. Doesn't matter. What matters is where it left a footprint. His fingers danced across the controls, isolating the signal, magnifying it. The console drew out faint coordinates, unstable but legible. Morty frowned. That's not Earth, is it? Rick shook his head slowly. No, Morty, that's deep. Real deep. A place most people don't come back from, which means we're going. Morty's stomach lurched. What? Rick, after what just happened? You saw it. It almost took me, and now you want to go closer to it? Rick slammed a hand against the console, startling Morty into silence. His voice was sharp, but not cruel, desperate. You think I want this?
You think I like dragging my grandson towards some eldritch nightmare that wants to chew on his soul? No, Morty, but you're connected to it whether we like it or not. The only chance we have of breaking that connection is finding out how others survived it, or why they didn't. Morty swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to argue, to run, to bury his head under blankets and pretend the last 2 days hadn't happened. But deep down, he knew Rick was right. Pretending wouldn't stop it. Sooner or later, the figure would reach again, and if they weren't ready, it wouldn't stop until it had him. Rick turned back to the console, his hands steady now, his mind locked in on the hunt. Get some rest, Morty. We leave at dawn. Morty laughed bitterly. Rest? How the hell am I supposed to rest after that? Rick didn't answer. He just kept working, the glow of the screen painting his face, hiding whatever he wasn't saying. That night, Morty lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the house unnervingly quiet. His mum and sister were still away, unaware of the nightmare unraveling inside their home. He pressed his hand against his chest, feeling the hum like a faint lullaby, steady and patient. It almost soothed him, almost convinced him to let go, but he knew better now. It wasn't comfort. It was a hook. Sleep eventually pulled him under, and with it came the dreams. He stood once more in that endless field, the air heavy with silence. The figure loomed closer this time, its shape clearer, though still shifting, its surface rippling like water over glass. It reached out, its arms stretching farther than it should have been able to. Closer, it whispered, the word vibrating through his bones.
You are the door. You are the path. Morty stumbled back, but there was nowhere to go. The horizon stretched forever, and the figure's voice filled the sky. He clamped his hands over his ears, but it didn't matter. The sound wasn't
coming from outside. It was inside him, vibrating from his chest outward. He woke with a strangled gasp, sweat drenching his skin, the hum louder than ever. It hadn't been just a dream. It was reaching even here, in his sleep. The next morning, when Rick found him pale and trembling, Morty didn't resist. He didn't argue about leaving anymore. He just nodded, grabbed his backpack, and followed Rick to the garage where the ship waited. Rick powered up the craft, his eyes hard on the horizon as the engines roared to life. Hold on tight, Morty. Wherever this thing started, we're going straight into the heart of it. As the ship lifted off, Morty pressed his hand against his chest again. The hum answered, steady, patient, eager. And for the first time, Morty wondered if he'd already lost more of himself to it than he realized. The ship tore through layers of sky, slipping free of Earth's atmosphere in a violent tremor that rattled Morty's teeth. The hum in his chest pulsed stronger with every passing second, as though it could sense where they were heading and welcomed it. Morty sat rigid in his seat, fists clenching and unclenching against the straps that held him down. He wanted to ask Rick again if this was really necessary, if there wasn't another way, but he already knew the answer. Rick's eyes were locked on the swirling void ahead, his jaw set tight, his hands guiding the ship as though it were an extension of his own body. Morty swallowed the lump in his throat and turned his gaze to the viewport. Stars streaked into threads of light, reality bending as the ship cut into interdimensional space. The further they went, the heavier the hum grew, until it wasn't just inside his chest anymore. It was in his ears, in his fingertips, in the very air he breathed. It synchronized with the ship's vibrations, and for a fleeting, disorienting moment, Morty couldn't tell whether it was his own body shaking or the vessel. Rick noticed. "You feel it ramping up, huh?" His voice was sharp, though not unkind. "That's good. Means we're on the right track." Morty turned his head, his voice breaking. "Good. Rick, it feels like it's trying to, like it's..."
Already inside me. What if it's just pulling us straight to it? Rick's grip on the controls tightened.
He didn't answer immediately, his silence loud enough to make Morty's stomach knot. Finally, he exhaled and muttered, "It's already in you, Morty. That's why we don't get to sit back and wait anymore. But if it's drawing us in, then it's also leading us to where it came from, and that's where we cut this thing off." The words didn't soothe Morty, but they grounded him. He pressed himself deeper into the seat as the ship jerked and shook, tearing through unseen layers until the void around them changed. It wasn't the open emptiness of space anymore. It was darker, heavier, like the stars themselves had been. Blotted out, shapes moved in the distance, indistinct, like shadows swimming through black water. Morty's breath hitched. "Rick, are those—" "Don't look too long," Rick snapped, flipping a switch on the console. Panels lit up with symbols Morty didn't recognize, warnings flashing in colors that felt more threatening than red. Eyes in this place work both ways. Morty whipped his gaze back to his lap, but the after-image of the shapes burned in his vision, shifting like smears of ink. He blinked hard, trying to shake it, but the hum in his chest matched the rhythm of their movements. It was almost as if they knew him, recognized him, and were waiting. The ship groaned as Rick forced it deeper into the dark. "Coordinates are just up ahead. Whatever left that signal, it's close. Keep yourself together, Morty. No matter what you see, it's..."
"Not yours. It's not you."
Morty nodded shakily, clinging to Rick's words, even as the hum vibrated louder, like laughter pressed against his bones. The coordinates pulled them to a structure floating in the void, massive and broken, like the carcass of a titan left to drift in eternal silence. It wasn't a natural formation. The sharp lines of its architecture were still visible despite the decay, towers split down the middle, bridges hanging in jagged pieces, and spires stretching upward like skeletal fingers. Morty stared wide-eyed. "Rick, what is this place?" Rick's face was pale under the glow of the console, but his voice stayed steady. "An outpost, or it used to be. Judging by the tech signature, it's old. Real old. Predates even the Council's earliest records." The ship drifted closer, lights cutting through thick veils of dust. Morty thought he saw symbols carved into the walls, shapes that twisted when he tried to focus on them. His chest burned at their sight, the hum turning sharp, almost painful. He pressed his hands to his ribs, groaning. Rick shot him a glance.
"It's resonating. This is definitely where it happened. Hold tight, Morty. We're docking." The ship latched onto a fractured platform, the hiss of the seal echoing in the cabin. Rick grabbed a device from the console, a weapon fused with scanners, and shoved another smaller gadget into Morty's hands.
"Stay close to me. If that thing reaches out, this will dampen it for a little while. Don't let go." Morty's fingers closed around it instinctively, though he didn't trust it. His legs felt like rubber as he followed Rick into the broken structure, the air heavy and stale, filled with the faint metallic taste of age and decay. The halls were lined with murals, jagged and half-erased, but Morty could still make out the images. Figures, humanoid, though strange, stood in rows, their hands raised toward a towering presence etched into the stone. The presence stretched across every wall, its form shifting in every panel. Sometimes many-armed, sometimes faceless, sometimes Nothing more than a spiral consuming all. Morty shuddered. Rick! It's the same. That's the same thing from my dreams. Rick raised his weapon, scanning the symbols. His jaw clenched. Then this isn't just some outpost. It's a shrine. Or worse. They moved deeper, their footsteps echoing in the hollow corridors. The hum inside Morty grew unbearable, each step pulling him forward against his will, as though the place itself recognized him. He stumbled, and Rick caught his arm, steadying him. Focus, Morty. Don't let it drag.
You're not a passenger. You're still in control. But Morty wasn't so sure.
His vision blurred as they entered a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness, its floor etched with spirals that seemed to spin when he stepped onto them. In the center stood a device, massive and broken, wires trailing like veins, its core shattered but still pulsing with a faint, sickly light. The hum in Morty's chest flared, syncing perfectly with the device. His knees buckled and he fell, clutching himself as the vibration roared in his skull. Rick cursed, rushing to the console of the broken machine, scanning it furiously. This is it. This is the source. They built this thing to channel it, to invite it. Morty barely heard him. The spirals on the floor writhed in his vision, the broken murals twisting until the figure stepped free of them, looming in the chamber's shadows. It stretched toward him, its voice vibrating through the walls. "You are the door," Morty screamed, the sound breaking in his throat. Rick spun, firing his weapon at the shadow, bursts of energy scattering the figure into ripples of smoke. But it reformed instantly, closer than before. Rick grabbed Morty, shaking him hard.
Fight it! Don't listen! It's not you! You're not the door! Morty's eyes were wide and glassy, his chest glowing faintly beneath his shirt, as though something inside him was waking. The figure's voice rose, layered and infinite. Closer. Closer! Through him we return! Rick's face twisted with something between fury and fear. He jammed a device against Morty's chest, the dampener sparking violently as it fought the resonance.
Morty gasped, the glow flickering, the hum sputtering unevenly. The shadow let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, but a vibration that rattled the chamber walls, shaking dust and fragments loose. For a brief second, it recoiled, and Rick pulled Morty to his feet, dragging him back toward the corridor. "Not yet," Rick snarled at the figure. "You're not taking him, not while I'm still breathing." But as they stumbled through the crumbling shrine, Morty felt the hum steady.
Again slower, deeper.
It wasn't gone, it never would be, and in the pit of his stomach, Morty knew the figure wasn't lying. He was the door. Rick hauled Morty through the broken corridors, the weight of the boy dragging against his shoulder as though the shrine itself were trying to hold him back. Every step echoed with a low vibration like a heartbeat buried deep within the walls. The voice that had spoken through Morty hadn't returned, but its presence lingered in the air, clinging to the edges of sound.
Heavy and waiting.
Dust rained down from cracks above, stirred by the shadow's reverberating scream, and the whole place felt like it was straining to collapse inward. Morty stumbled, his breaths shallow and uneven. His chest flickered faintly beneath his shirt, the glow returning in stuttering pulses. "Rick, I can't. It's still inside me." "Don't say that," Rick snapped, his tone harsher than his eyes. "It's not inside you, Morty. It's just latching on. Big difference." He tightened his grip on Morty's wrist, practically dragging him down the winding corridor. "And if we don't move, it's going to do more than latch." The spirals carved into the floor seemed to twist under their boots, stretching into infinite, coils that threatened to pull them down into themselves. Morty tried to keep his eyes averted, but the hum in his chest reacted every time they passed one, tugging at his vision like a magnet. He squeezed his eyes shut, focusing only on Rick's hand gripping his arm. They reached the docking platform, and for a brief moment relief washed over Morty at the sight of the ship. But that relief curdled when the shadow seeped into the chamber. Behind them, stretching like liquid across the broken walls. It moved faster now, less a shape than a wave, and every surface it touched warped with impossible symbols. Rick cursed under his breath, slamming a device against the wall beside the ship's hatch. A field shimmered to life, a crude barrier of bending light that hissed as the shadow pressed against it. "Temporary measure," Rick muttered, pulling Morty into the ship. "Won't hold it long." The hatch sealed behind them, but the hum in Morty's chest throbbed in time with the pounding against the barrier outside. He collapsed into his seat, trembling as though the vibration alone could tear him apart. Rick rushed to the console, hands flying across controls, forcing the ship to power up despite warning signals blaring red. The engines roared, the vessel shuddering violently as it disengaged from the platform. Through the viewport, Morty saw the barrier crack, spiderwebs of light splintering under the shadow's weight. Then it shattered entirely, the figure surging forward, wrapping around the broken outpost as if claiming it. "Rick!" Morty's voice cracked.
I see it, Morty!" Rick barked, slamming a lever forward. The ship shot into the void, tearing away from the collapsing shrine. For a heartbeat, Morty thought they'd escaped, but the shadow wasn't bound to
the outpost anymore. It stretched after them, endless and formless, chasing like the night sky itself had turned alive. The hum inside Morty matched its rhythm, vibrating harder, deeper, as though calling it closer. He clawed at his chest, tears springing to his eyes. "It's pulling me, Rick! I can feel it! It wants me!" Rick abandoned the console and snatched the dampener from Morty's lap, slamming it against his chest. Sparks flared, the glow faltering again. Morty gasped, his body convulsing as the device fought the resonance. The shadow outside writhed, its movements stuttering in response, as if something tethered between them had been disrupted. Rick gritted his teeth, holding the device in place with one hand while steering the ship with the other. "Stay with
me, Morty. You're not theirs. You're mine." The words pierced through Morty's haze, grounding him. The glow in his chest dimmed, the hum weakening into a faint tremor. Outside, the shadow slowed, its shape dissolving back into the void, until finally it vanished completely, leaving only the stars behind. The silence that followed was suffocating. Morty slumped forward, drenched in sweat, his breathing ragged, but steady. Rick carefully removed the device, staring at its cracked casing. It had burned out completely, the metal warped and useless. "Shit," Rick muttered under his breath, tossing it aside. "That was our last line of defense." Morty raised his head weakly, eyes glassy. "It's not gone, Rick. I could feel it right before it disappeared." "It wasn't running away, it was waiting." Rick didn't respond. He returned to the console, guiding the ship back into stable space, though his hands trembled more than usual. His silence was worse than any confirmation. Morty leaned back in his seat, staring blankly at the viewport, the faint ache in his chest reminding him that the hum was never truly gone. After what felt like hours, Rick finally spoke. "We're not out of the woods. That thing, whatever." "It is. It doesn't just want to break through, it wants you to be the latch. And if it's patient enough to wait, then it's already planning its next move." Morty's throat tightened. "So what do we do?" Rick's jaw worked as he considered. His eyes shadowed. "We find out where this started. That shrine wasn't random.
Someone built it. Someone opened the door the first time. If we can trace their mistake, maybe we can find a way to slam it shut." Morty hesitated, his voice shaking. "And if we can't?" Rick finally looked at him, the exhaustion in his eyes barely masking the fire beneath. "Then I burn every dimension it tries to crawl into before I let it have you." Morty swallowed hard, unsure if the words were meant as comfort or warning. The ship drifted silently now, the stars steady once more, but Morty couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was still watching, somewhere beyond sight, waiting for him to falter. As Rick set a new course, Morty pressed his hand to his chest, feeling the faint vibration echo there. It was weaker now, but steady, like a clock counting down. He closed his eyes, and in the silence of the ship, he could still hear it whisper. Door. The ship drifted in silence, its hum the only sound filling the cabin. Yet Morty couldn't shake the echo of that last whisper in his skull. Door. It reverberated faintly, not as loud as before, but it was there, curling into his thoughts like smoke. He pressed a trembling hand to his chest, half hoping the vibration would vanish, half fearing it already belonged to him. Rick hadn't spoken since setting the course, his eyes locked on the shifting streams of hyperspace ahead, but Morty could tell he wasn't just piloting. He was thinking, unraveling, planning. Finally, Rick broke the silence. "We're heading to an old archive station, fringe of council space. Nobody goes there anymore because, well, it's a floating death trap, but if I'm right, it's got records predating even their cover-ups. If we're going to find out who built that shrine, and why it'll be there," Morty shifted uneasily, "and what if those records just don't exist? What if this thing's been erased on purpose?" Rick gave a bitter laugh, short and sharp. "Oh, Morty, you're catching on. That's exactly why we're going. If someone tried that hard to bury it, then they knew it was real. And if they
Knew it was real, they knew how to deal with it." His voice softened for a moment, almost against his will. Or how to unleash it. Morty shivered, staring at the streaks of light outside.
He wanted to ask if Rick had ever dealt with something like this before, but he already knew the answer. The way Rick had looked back at the shrine, the way his hands had trembled, even as he fought to keep them steady. This was new. Too new. The hours blurred, Morty drifting between restless half-sleep and the constant awareness of that faint pulse in his chest. Sometimes it quickened when he closed his eyes, the whispers seeping closer, faint syllables that never formed into words. Once he thought he saw movement beyond the viewport, a shadow between the stars, but when he blinked, it was gone. By the time the archive station appeared, a derelict mass of spires and shattered domes orbiting a dead planet, Morty's nerves were frayed. Rick guided the ship into one of its docking arms, sparks raining as the decrepit machinery struggled to respond. The hatch groaned open into darkness, the air stale and metallic, like a tomb. "Stay close," Rick muttered, pulling a small device from his coat. A beam of pale light cut through the dark, illuminating corridors littered with fragments of broken screens and shattered glass. The station was silent, except for the occasional creak of old metal shifting, but Morty couldn't shake the feeling. It was listening. They reached what must have been the central archive. Vast walls of data cores lined the chamber, their surfaces dull with centuries of dust. Rick wasted no time prying open panels and jamming cables into place. His portal gun flickered weakly, rigged now as a crude processor. Streams of alien code flashed across its small display. "Come on, show me your dirty little secrets." Rick muttered, typing furiously. Morty hung back, the dim glow of the screens casting long shadows that seemed to crawl when he wasn't looking directly
at them. Finally, something clicked. A section of the display lit up in red, scrolling with restricted entries. Rick's eyes narrowed. Bingo!
He opened one file and a diagram filled the screen, spirals carved into stone, identical to those they'd seen at the shrine. Notes in a forgotten dialect accompanied it, but Rick's translator struggled, spitting out fragments. Resonance.
Vessel! Threshold. Morty's stomach dropped. Vessel? Like me? Rick didn't answer at first, jaw tight as he pulled up more files.
Each one was worse than the last. Records of experiments, attempts to contain the resonance, warnings that it could not be destroyed, only redirected into living conduits. Each attempt ended in failure, the last record describing the collapse of an entire sector before cutting off mid-sentence. Morty's voice cracked. Rick, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be the thing it uses. Rick slammed his hand against the console, startling Morty. You're not gonna be, not as long as I'm around. But his eyes betrayed him, just for a moment, an old fear he couldn't mask. Before Morty could respond, the chamber lights flickered one by one until the entire room was bathed in a dull red glow. A low vibration ran through the floor, familiar and wrong. The data cores hummed, spirals of light blooming across their surfaces. Morty stumbled back, clutching his chest. The hum inside him was answering, louder now, syncing with the station itself. He gasped, his voice breaking. Rick, it's here! The shadows on the walls thickened, stretching unnaturally, pulling free from the surfaces. They writhed upward, coalescing into the same void shape they'd seen before. Only this time, it wasn't outside. It was inside the archive, filling the air with its suffocating presence. Rick yanked Morty close, shielding him with one arm while fumbling with the portal gun. Shit! This thing must have been dormant in the systems, waiting for someone stupid enough to poke at. Morty's chest flared, light bursting through his shirt. The shadows surged toward him, drawn like a tide. He screamed, the sound twisting into a resonance that shook the entire chamber. The spirals carved into the walls ignited, responding to
him, not the shadow. And for a brief instant, the figure hesitated. Rick seized the moment, slamming a device onto the ground.
A blast of energy rippled outward, scattering the shadow like smoke in a gale. The lights sputtered, and the archive fell silent again. Morty collapsed against Rick, chest still glowing faintly, the hum not fading this time. Rick held him tightly, his voice low but urgent. It's accelerating. Whatever timetable that thing had, you just sped it up. Morty panted, his hands trembling. Then what do we do? Rick stared at the dying glow of the data cores, his mind already racing. We stopped looking for answers.
In what they tried before, clearly they failed. We're going to have to build something new, something that fights back.
Morty swallowed hard, the ache in his chest pulsing stronger, like a drumbeat urging him onward. He knew Rick was right. The shadow wasn't waiting anymore. It was coming, and now it had his rhythm. The air in the ruined archive hung heavy, as if the station itself remembered the shadow's intrusion. Dust floated in faint beams of red emergency light, and Morty's uneven breathing filled the silence, each inhale catching against the pressure in his chest. Rick didn't move for a long moment, his hand still clutching Morty's shoulder.
Eyes fixed on the scorched floor, where his device had blasted the void away. His expression wasn't victory, it was calculation.
Finally, Rick shifted, pushing Morty upright, his tone clipped but steady. On your feet, Morty. We can't stay here. That thing wasn't attacking. It was testing. Morty blinked, still pale. Testing? It nearly tore me apart. Exactly. Rick snapped cables from the ruined console, stuffing them into his coat. Which means it's learning your limits. Every time it makes contact, it figures out more about how you tick. And right now, you're letting it set the rules. We flip the script, or you're done. Morty swallowed, the hum inside him still vibrating, stronger now, like an echo chamber, under his skin. He wanted to argue, to tell Rick he wasn't strong enough. But the look on Rick's face, the same desperate focus Morty had only seen in their worst adventures, shut him up. They staggered back through the shadow-drenched corridors, the air colder now, as though the station itself had been hollowed out by the void's presence. By the time they reached the ship, Morty's chest burned, the light flickering beneath his ribs every time his fear spiked. He collapsed into the passenger seat while Rick sealed the hatch and fired the engines. The docking clamps groaned, releasing them into the void. Outside, the dead planet turned slowly, its cracked surface catching faint glimmers from the ship's thrusters. Rick kept one hand on the controls, the other rummaging in his coat for parts. He muttered under his breath, half to Morty, half to himself. Resonance, vessel, conduit. They weren't trying to stop it, Morty. They were trying
to cage it. That's why they failed. Morty's voice trembled. So, what? You're saying we can't stop it? Rick slammed a tool onto the console. No, I'm saying we stop playing their game. You're not a cage, Morty. You're a weapon, and we're going to make sure you hit harder than whatever's coming for you. Morty froze, eyes wide. Weapon? Rick, I don't want to. Rick cut him off, his voice sharp, but not unkind.
Doesn't matter what you want right now. Survival trumps comfort. If we don't figure this out, that shadow turns you into a doorway, and everything behind it gets a free pass into this universe. You think I'm going to let that happen? Morty fell silent, pressing his hand to his chest as the hum flared again. He knew Rick wasn't exaggerating. He had felt it. The pull of the shadow, the way it wanted him open, hollow. The idea of being turned into some kind of lockpick for the void made his stomach twist. Hours bled into each other as Rick worked in the back of the ship, tools clattering while he stripped down old devices and rewired them into something unrecognizable. Sparks flew, acrid smoke curling into the air. Morty sat nearby, restless, every flicker of light outside the viewport making him flinch. Sometimes he swore he saw shapes sliding between the stars, always vanishing when he tried to focus. At last, Rick returned, holding a crude-looking device that pulsed with a low hum of its own. It resembled a cross between a chest harness and a generator, wires snaking around its frame. He set it down with a grim nod. "This," Rick said, "is a resonance stabilizer. Crude, experimental, probably dangerous, but so's breathing near."
You right now. Strap in, Morty recoiled. You want me to put that on? What if it just makes it worse? Rick knelt, his voice firm. It will make it worse, Morty. At first, but then it'll give you control.
That thing inside you isn't going away, so you either learn to steer it, or it steers you. Morty hesitated, his heart pounding in time with the hum in his chest. Finally, with shaking hands, he lifted the device and strapped it on. The metal was cold, biting against his skin. Rick flicked a switch, and pain exploded through Morty's body. He screamed, collapsing to his knees as light surged out of him, threads of energy weaving into the stabilizer. His veins lit up like molten cracks, his eyes glowing white for a
moment. The hum crescendoed into a violent resonance, rattling the ship's walls. Hold it, Morty! Don't fight the pain! Ride it!
Rick shouted, adjusting dials as sparks burst from the device. Morty clawed at the floor, every nerve aflame, but gradually the wild energy began to bend, its rhythm syncing with the stabilizer's pulse. His breathing steadied, the glow dimming, into a contained radiance instead of a chaotic burst. For the first time since the shrine, the hum felt almost his. He collapsed back against the wall, gasping, sweat pouring down his face. Rick, I felt it. I could move it, Rick. Allowed himself the barest smile, though his eyes were still shadowed. Good. That's step one. You're still a walking nuke, but at least now you've got a safety switch. Before Morty could respond, alarms blared across the console. Proximity sensors screamed as an anomaly tore open in the void outside, a ripple of pure darkness, spiraling like the patterns they'd seen in the shrine. From within, the shadow stretched outward, its form sharper, more defined, as if it had grown since their last encounter. Morty's chest thrummed in answer, his stabilizer sparking violently. He staggered to his feet, panic flooding him. "Rick, it's coming through!" Rick slammed his fists on the controls, eyes burning with fury. "Of course it is. It knows we're onto it." He grabbed Morty's arm, dragging him toward the weapons bay. "You wanted to know what being a weapon means, Morty? Congratulations, you're about to find out." The ship trembled as the shadow's tendrils wrapped around it, pulling them toward the rift. Lights flickered, metal groaned, and Morty's stabilizer flared as the resonance inside him screamed to be released.
He clutched his chest, his voice breaking. "Rick, I can't hold it!" Rick shoved a glowing cylinder into Morty's hands, wiring it into the stabilizer with manic precision. "Then don't hold it! Aim it!" The shadow's face pressed against
the viewport, formless and endless, yet unmistakably watching. Morty felt its hunger, its need to pull him open. But for the first time, there was something else, a spark of resistance that was his. His scream tore through the ship as he released the resonance, light blasting outward through the stabilizer. The energy carved into the shadow, not dispersing it fully, but driving it back, forcing the rift to flicker. The entire ship shuddered under the strain, alarms wailing as the void howled around them. When it was over, Morty collapsed into Rick's arms, the stabilizer smoking, his chest still, glowing faintly. Outside, the rift sealed, leaving only empty space and silence. Rick's jaw was tight, his hands trembling as he steadied Morty. "You bought us time, Morty, but that thing's not done. It's never going to stop until it gets what it wants." Morty's voice was barely a whisper, his eyelids heavy. "And what if what it wants is me?" Rick looked away, his silence heavier than any answer he could have given. Rick kept his grip tight on Morty's shoulder, lowering him gently to the floor of the ship as the last sparks from the stabilizer fizzled out. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by Morty's ragged breaths. Outside, the void looked deceptively calm, a wide sea of stars swallowing the memory of the rift, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. But both of them knew the truth, that silence was just the shadow's way of waiting. Rick rose abruptly, pacing. Across the cramped cabin, every line of his face carved deep with frustration. He downed the last of a flask, tossed it aside, and started pulling tools back out, his movements fast and erratic. "That wasn't a win, Morty. That was a warning."
"Shot. You think it's hurt? It's not hurt. It's interested." Morty forced himself to sit upright, still trembling.
His chest glowed faintly beneath the stabilizer straps, like embers that refused to cool. He hated how right Rick sounded, hated even more the thought that his effort had only provoked the thing further. "So what now? I can't do that."
"Again, Rick. I thought I was going to burn from the inside out." Rick slammed a hand on the console, spinning toward him, eyes sharp. Then we make you stronger before it comes back. Morty's stomach twisted. Stronger how? You're talking about turning me into some kind of battery. Not a battery, Rick snapped, then forced his tone lower, almost measured. A conductor. Batteries drain, Morty. Conductors channel. You've got raw output that
Thing wants to gorge on. If you learn to control it, we use its own hunger against it. Morty shook his head, pressing his hands to his temples. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be some cosmic chew toy. Rick's face softened, just slightly, the edge of guilt flickering behind his eyes, though his voice stayed firm. Neither did I, Morty. But you've got two options. Roll over and let it hollow you out, or stand up and make it choke on the power it wants. The words hung heavy, sinking deep into Morty's chest until silence pressed between them again. Rick turned back to the console, flipping switches and scanning coordinates until a faint hum filled the ship. There's a place, ancient, dangerous, off the maps. It was built by a race that nearly cracked resonance manipulation before they wiped themselves out. If anyone left breadcrumbs for harnessing this kind of power, it's there. Morty stiffened, gripping the straps of the stabilizer. And if they wiped themselves out because of it? Rick shot him a glance, a grim half-smile twitching at the corner of his mouth. Then we learn from their mistakes instead of repeating them. That's called progress. The ship lurched into faster-than-light travel, stars smearing into streaks across the viewport. Morty leaned back, his pulse sinking uneasily with the stabilizer's quiet thrum. Sleep wouldn't come, not with the memory of the shadow pressing against the glass, still seared into his mind. Hours later, the ship slowed as they neared their destination. The viewport revealed a barren system, its sun dim and fractured, casting a dying glow over shattered planets. At the center of it all floated a massive construct, a labyrinthine structure of stone and metal, orbiting in silence. It looked less like a space station and more like a cathedral torn apart and reassembled by something that didn't care if the pieces fit. Morty's mouth went dry. That's where we're going? Rick's voice was flat. Yeah, the resonant mausoleum, built to study and contain power like yours. Every faction that's tried to claim it disappeared, which makes it perfect for us. As they descended toward the ruin, Morty felt the hum in his chest spike, his stabilizer flickering. The closer they got, the heavier the air seemed to press against him, as though the place itself was aware of his presence. The ship docked with a grinding groan, ancient doors parting reluctantly as though disturbed from centuries of silence. Rick shouldered his portal gun and handed Morty a compact weapon. Stay close, and if the stabilizer acts up, tell me before you fry us both. They stepped into the mausoleum's hollow halls, the walls lined with inscriptions glowing faintly as if they had been waiting for someone like Morty. Symbols pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, casting eerie reflections across the cracked floor. Morty whispered, "Rick."
It's like it knows I'm here. Rick scanned the walls with a handheld device, muttering, "Not knows, resonates. It's reacting to you because that's what it was built to do. Stay sharp." The deeper they moved, the louder the resonance
Became inside Morty's chest, a dull vibration that threatened to overwhelm him. The stabilizer strained, sparks biting at his skin, his vision blurred, shapes shifting along the walls. He stumbled, grabbing Rick's arm. Rick steadied him, jaw clenched. "Focus, Morty! Don't let the place tune you like an instrument." But Morty's eyes widened as a figure emerged from the shadows ahead. It wasn't the void this time. But something worse in its own way, a humanoid form, tall and cloaked in fractured armor, its face a mask of shifting symbols, its voice echoed without sound, vibrating directly through Morty's chest. "You carry the echo."
"You are the key." Morty staggered back, fear burning in his throat. "Rick, what the hell is that?" Rick raised his weapon, his expression dark. "A warden, leftovers of the civilization that built this place, not alive, not dead, just stuck, waiting for someone dumb enough to show up." The warden stepped closer, symbols along its body flaring brighter.
Morty's chest burned in response, the stabilizer sparking violently. The voice rang again, louder. "You cannot control it. You are vessel, not master. You will break." Morty gritted his teeth, clutching the stabilizer as the hum clawed at
his insides. Rick barked at him. "Don't listen to it, Morty! It's running the same con as the shadow. You're not a vessel, you're the driver."
The warden raised a hand, and the mausoleum trembled, walls vibrating like the strings of a colossal instrument. Resonance waves slammed into Morty, driving him to his knees. He screamed, light spilling from his chest in chaotic bursts. Rick fired. His weapon, energy bolts tearing into the warden, but they dissolved against its body like water against stone. He cursed, yanking Morty upright. "Channel it, Morty! Prove it wrong!" The stabilizer flared, surging with unstable power. Morty's fear threatened to spiral, but beneath it was the spark Rick had forced him to see, the possibility of control. He clenched his fists, forcing the light to condense instead of scatter. The resonance shifted from chaos to rhythm, syncing with his breath. The warden's symbols flickered, its form trembling. For the first time, it stepped back. Morty, his voice hoarse but steady, shouted through the pain, "I'm not your vessel, I'm my own!" He unleashed the resonance in a focused burst, the energy slamming into the warden. Cracks split across its body, symbols shattering like glass. With a final fractured cry, the warden dissolved into shards of fading light, scattering into the
air. Morty collapsed again, chest heaving, the stabilizer sparking but intact. Rick crouched beside him, eyes wide with something like pride buried under exhaustion. "That's it, Morty! That's what control looks like." But before Morty could catch his breath, the mausoleum itself shifted. The walls pulsed brighter, runes igniting in a chain reaction. The ground rumbled, and distant echoes stirred deeper.
In the labyrinth. Rick's face hardened, his hand tightening on Morty's arm. "We just woke up the whole place, and if one warden was guarding the door, you don't want to meet what they left in the vault." The mausoleum's tremors deepened, dust raining from the cracked arches above as though the structure itself was trying to shake Morty loose from its grip. He clutched his chest, his breath jagged, each inhalation vibrating against the unstable thrum of the stabilizer. Rick's hand was firm on his arm, pulling him upright, his gaze darting from the glowing walls to the pulsing corridors beyond. The runes had changed since the warden's defeat, no longer faint etchings of history, but radiant arteries of power, alive and moving, as if the entire place had awakened to Morty's presence. "Rick," Morty gasped, trying to steady himself.
The wall, they're alive." Rick's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing behind the harsh glow.
"Not alive, Morty. Responsive. This whole place was built to test and tune energy like yours. Beating that warden, that was step one. Now the system thinks you're ready for step two." Morty felt bile rise in his throat. His skin tingled. With the humming resonance, the stabilizer already straining to keep the glow contained. "Step two? Rick, I barely survived step one." Yeah, well, welcome to advanced courses. Rick adjusted the dials on the stabilizer, sparks flickering as he forced the hum into a steadier rhythm. His voice was sharp, but not unkind. You hold it together, Morty. If you crack now, this place won't kill you quick. It'll pull you apart piece by piece until there's nothing left but noise. Morty swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe with the machine's pulse. The mausoleum's corridors lit one by one ahead of them, guiding like a trail. Rick muttered under his breath, "Great! A self-guided nightmare tour. Just what I needed." They followed the path deeper into the labyrinth, each step echoing against the vast chamber walls. The runes shifted as they passed, their glow intensifying, forming patterns that twisted like constellations. Morty's chest throbbed with every shift, as though the maze itself was syncing with his heartbeat. "Rick," Morty whispered. It's calling me forward." Rick kept walking, his weapon drawn, voice clipped. "Of course it is. That's how bait works. You feel chosen, Morty? Special? That's what it wants. But trust me, this place doesn't crown heroes. It
makes martyrs." Morty shivered, the words sinking like lead.
Yet despite his fear, he couldn't deny the pull, an insistent tug somewhere deep inside that urged him to keep moving. The corridor opened into a vast circular chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. At the center stood a colossal structure, a vault of interlocking rings suspended in midair, each etched with runes that pulsed in time with Morty's chest. The rings rotated slowly, grinding against one another with the weight of centuries, their movement filling the chamber with a low, resonant drone. Morty froze, his voice trembling. That's the vault?" Rick scanned the readings on his device, his face grim. "That's more than a vault. It's a resonance core."
"Everything this civilization built, everything they discovered, it's locked inside there." Morty's stabilizer flared violently, sparks snapping across his skin. He staggered, clutching at it. "Rick, it's reacting to me!" "Of
"Course it is," Rick barked, moving quickly to his side, adjusting the device. "That core's reading you like a tuning fork. It knows you're here, and it wants in." The rings began to rotate faster, their hum deepening into a near-deafening roar. Morty's knees buckled under the weight of the resonance, his vision blurring as light spilled from the cracks in the floor. He heard whispers, not from outside, but from inside, seeping into his mind, weaving through his thoughts. "You are the key," the voices chanted. "You are the vessel. Open, and all will be revealed." Morty shook his head violently, pressing his hands to his ears, though it did nothing. "Rick, it's in my head! I can't shut it out." Rick grabbed him by the shoulders, forcing Morty to meet his eyes. "Listen to me, Morty. You're not a vessel, you're not some cosmic doorstop. You're in control. Those voices, they're static, just noise. You decide what channel you tune to." Morty's breathing came faster, but Rick's words anchored him, pulling him back from the spiral. He focused on the rhythm of his breath, syncing it with the stabilizer's pulse, forcing the whispers to fade to the edges. The light around him steadied, no longer flaring wildly, but pulsing in rhythm with his heart. The vault's rings halted suddenly, aligning into a single, massive circle. At its center, a crack of light split open, widening into a portal that shimmered with impossible depth. A low vibration filled the chamber, and from the light emerged something vast, shadows coiling into form, eyes like burning voids staring down at them. Morty's chest seized with recognition. "Rick, it's the shadow, it's here!" Rick raised his weapon, his expression unreadable, but his voice calm, deliberate. "Not here, just reaching through. That thing's tethered to whatever's inside the vault. This whole place is its back door." The shadow's voice thundered across the chamber, vibrating through stone and flesh alike. At last, the key arrives. You cannot resist what you are meant to open. Morty stumbled back, panic rising. Rick, I can't fight that thing.
Again! Not here! Not like this! Rick fired a volley into the shadow, the blasts dissolving harmlessly into its swirling form.
He cursed under his breath, then turned to Morty. You don't fight it, Morty. You deny it. It wants you to unlock that vault, so you do the opposite. You lock it down harder. Morty's eyes widened. Lock it down? How am I supposed
to do that? Rick adjusted the stabilizer, his movements quick, desperate.
This place was built with resonance. That means you can feed it resonance too, but on your terms. Focus, Morty. Picture the energy not bursting out, but sealing in. Contain it, like closing a door. The shadow extended a tendril, reaching
toward Morty, the whispers growing louder, more desperate. You cannot resist. You are the door. Open, and you will be free. Morty's body shook, the hum threatening to rip him apart. But Rick's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and unwavering.
Morty, you're not the door. You're the lock. Slam it shut. Something shifted in Morty then, a spark of defiance, small but unyielding. He pressed his hands to the stabilizer, forcing the energy inward, willing the light to condense, to tighten. The runes across the chamber flared, responding to his command. The vault's rings grinding in protest. The shadow screamed, its form distorting as the portal began to shrink. Morty gritted his teeth, every muscle burning as he forced the resonance
into containment. The light in his chest blazed brighter and sharper than before, until with a final surge, the vault sealed shut, the crack of light vanishing in an instant. The chamber fell silent.
The hum faded, the runes dimmed to a low, steady glow. Morty collapsed to his knees, gasping, sweat dripping down his face. Rick knelt beside him, scanning the stabilizer. For once, his voice carried a note of pride. You did it, Morty. You didn't just fight it, you shut it out. You're starting to get it. Morty shook his head weakly, his voice hoarse. Rick, it's not gone. I felt it. It's still out there, waiting. Rick's gaze lingered on the sealed vault, his expression unreadable. Yeah. And now it knows you can slam the door in its face, which means next time it's not coming with whispers, it's coming with war. Morty's chest still burned from the strain, each breath dragging against the echo of energy he'd forced back into the vault. His knees dug into the cold stone as he tried to steady himself, his palms slick with sweat. The silence pressing in was heavier than the roar that had filled the chamber moments before. It wasn't relief. It was the weight of something unfinished, the sense of a storm paused, not ended. Rick adjusted the stabilizer with careful, precise motions, his face lit by the faint glow of the runes, now pulsing low around them. For once, his voice wasn't sarcastic or dismissive. You held it, Morty. That wasn't just shutting a door. You rewrote the lock. That's not nothing. Morty swallowed, his voice a raw rasp. But it's still out there, Rick. I could feel it. He broke off, shuddering, remembering the voice that had seeped into his thoughts, the promise of freedom twisted into threat. It knows me now. It's not going to stop. Rick didn't argue, and that scared Morty more than anything. His grandfather's silence was never emptiness. It was calculation. Rick's gaze lingered on the vault, the rings now fused into a single, inert mass. The runes etched into their surface flickered faintly, as though still alive beneath the surface. Waiting? Yeah, Rick finally muttered, holstering his weapon. It's not gone, just boxed in. Thing about boxes, Morty, is something always figures out how to open them again. He looked down at Morty, and for the briefest flicker, there was something like concern in his eyes. That means we gotta stay 3 moves ahead. Morty's body trembled as he tried to rise, Rick steadying him with a grip that was firm but careful. The stabilizer hummed weakly against Morty's chest, its once frantic vibration now steady but strained, like a heart after a sprint. As they turned from the sealed vault, the corridor ahead lit up with fresh runes leading them away. Morty's skin prickled at the sight. "It's still guiding us," Rick grunted, eyes narrowing. Guiding or herding, either way it wants us moving. The path wound deeper through the mausoleum, past chambers lined with statues of long-forgotten figures, guardians perhaps, or kings. Their stone eyes seemed to follow as Morty passed, and each step carried the memory of the Shadow's voice echoing in his skull. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, waiting. "Rick," Morty whispered after a while, "what if this wasn't just a vault? What if it's a prison? What if they built all this not to protect their secrets, but to hold that thing in?" Rick stopped mid-step, his jaw tightening. He didn't answer right away, which only made Morty's
heart race faster.
Finally, Rick exhaled sharply through his nose. "You're not wrong. Civilizations don't build resonant cores with self-adjusting labyrinths and psychic locks just for storage. That thing's been here longer than us, Morty. Longer than this."
Entire system, maybe, Morty's stomach churned. "And now it knows I can open or close its prison."
"Yeah," Rick said flatly, resuming his stride. "Which makes you target number 1. Morty almost wished Rick had sugarcoated it, but honesty from him was worse. It meant no easy way out. He forced his legs to keep moving, though every step felt heavier than the last. The runes guided them into another chamber, smaller but more intricate than the last. In the center stood a pedestal, upon which rested a crystalline shard, faintly glowing with the same energy as the vault. The air thrummed around it, vibrating against Morty's bones. Rick approached slowly, scanning with his device. Well, resonance shard, fragment of the core. Probably a fail-safe, something they built in case the big bad ever got too close to breaking free. He glanced at Morty. And lucky us, it's still active. Morty stared at the shard, his chest tightening as it pulsed in rhythm with his stabilizer.
It's calling me again, Rick." Rick's tone sharpened. "Then don't answer. Look, Morty, this shard might be the key to reinforcing the lock you just made, but the second you touch it, it's going to try to dig its hooks deeper into you. Question is..." He tilted his head, expression unreadable.
"Are you strong enough to hold it back again?" Morty's hands shook at his sides. He thought of the vault, the voices, the Shadow's promise. He thought of collapsing under its weight, of almost giving in. I don't know." Rick stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then you're going to find out. Because if you don't, Morty, this whole planet, maybe this whole galaxy, is screwed. Sometimes you don't get the luxury of not knowing." Morty's pulse hammered in his ears, the shard's glow reflecting in his wide eyes. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they neared the crystal. The moment his skin brushed its surface, a surge of energy shot through him, blinding and absolute. He screamed, the sound swallowed by the thrumming resonance that filled the chamber. His mind wasn't his own anymore. It was an ocean, endless and roaring, with voices crashing against him like waves. Images flickered, worlds burning, civilizations falling, a shadow spreading across stars. He saw chains and he saw locks, and he saw himself at the center of both. "Morty!" Rick's voice cut through the storm, distant but sharp. "Anchor yourself. Don't let it drag you under." Morty clutched at the stabilizer, his body convulsing as he fought to separate his thoughts from the flood. He forced himself to focus on Rick's voice, to remember the weight of his hand, the harsh steadiness that had pulled him back before. Slowly, painfully, he found a thread of himself in the torrent and held on. The shard's glow shifted, no longer overwhelming but steady, sinking with the stabilizer in harmony instead of chaos. Morty's body sagged, sweat pouring down his face, but he was still standing. Rick caught him before he collapsed, lowering him carefully to the floor. He scanned the stabilizer, nodding once. "You did it. You didn't just resist it, you
Bent it. Shards sink to you now. Means we've got a way to keep that vault locked tighter." Morty's chest heaved as he forced out words. "Rick, I saw things. Whole worlds. Destroyed. It's not just about me. If that thing
gets out." Rick's face hardened. "Then it's not just your problem, but it sure as hell makes you the front line." Morty closed his eyes, exhaustion dragging at him, but beneath it was something else, resolve. The fear was still there, heavy and suffocating, but now it had shape, and with it, purpose. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was holding something back, something too big for anyone else to face. The shard pulsed faintly in his hand, its glow a reminder of both the burden and the power now tied to him. Rick helped him up, their footsteps echoing as they left the chamber behind. The runes shifted again, lighting a path that seemed to stretch deeper still. Morty's voice was quiet, but steady. "Rick, whatever's waiting ahead, I'm not going to run this time." Rick glanced at him, and though his face stayed its usual mask of grim calculation, there was a flicker of something almost proud in his eyes. "Good. Because from here on out, Morty, running's not an option." The mausoleum trembled faintly as if in agreement, the path ahead glowing brighter, pulling them toward whatever awaited in the dark. The path sloped downward, the glow of the runes flickering like faint breaths along the walls as Morty and Rick pressed forward. The shard's weight was strange in Morty's hand. It didn't feel heavy, but it pulled at him all the same, like it wanted him to walk faster, to bring it somewhere, as though the crystal itself had a destination in mind. The mausoleum seemed to sense this too, the corridor tightening, the air thickening with resonance. Every step was like moving deeper into the lungs of some vast, slumbering creature. Rick kept glancing at his scanner, though the screen was distorted, with static, unable to make sense of the energy bleeding through the air. "Figures," he muttered under his breath. "Ancient cosmic prisons always screw with readings. Can't just give a guy clean numbers." Morty swallowed, trying to steady his breath. The shard pulsed against his skin, the beat sinking to his heart whether he wanted it to or not. He remembered the images he had seen when he first touched it. Burning worlds, endless shadows, the chains and locks he barely understood. Now, walking into the depths of the tomb, the memory felt closer, like the images were waiting just beyond. His vision ready to slip in again if he blinked too long. "Rick," he said softly, breaking the silence. What if I can't hold it again? What if next time it pulls me under?" Rick didn't stop walking, but his voice was firm, not dismissive. "Then you don't let it. Fear's leverage, Morty. The second you believe you're weak, you are. Think about monsters like this. It's not just muscle, it's manipulation. They wear you down until you do the work for them." He finally looked over, his expression hard but steady. "But you've already proven it doesn't own you. Remember that. The reassurance should have comforted Morty, but instead it reminded him of the pressure building on his shoulders. He wasn't just Morty anymore. He was a key, a lock, maybe even a weapon. And the shard knew it. The corridor widened suddenly into a grand hall, far larger than the chambers before. Towering pillars lined the space, each carved with the same flowing script of the runes, though these glowed brighter, their energy spiraling upward until they vanished into shadow above. At the far end stood another door, though unlike the vault they had sealed, this one was cracked open, blackness seeping through the gap like smoke. The resonance in the air was stronger here, almost deafening, and Morty staggered under its weight. Rick raised his weapon, his eyes narrowing. That's not good. From the fissure in the door, a figure began to emerge, not fully formed, more suggestion than substance. It was tall, impossibly so, with limbs that stretched unnaturally, its edges bleeding into the dark like mist. Its eyes burned faintly, twin points of sickly green light, and when it moved, the runes across the chamber flickered as though recoiling from it. Morty froze, his heart thundering. It's out! It got out! Rick's voice cut sharp, steady.
Not fully. That's a projection, an echo bleeding through the crack. It can't leave unless someone gives it form.
He glanced at Morty, then at the shard glowing furiously in his hand. And guess what it's after? The figure's voice seeped through the hall, not a sound so much as a vibration in their bones. Bearer of the shard, child of locks and chains, you cannot fight me forever. You are not my jailer, you are my path. Morty's knees almost buckled, the shard burning hotter, pulsing like it was eager to answer the voice. He clutched it tighter, his breath ragged. Rick, it knows me.
It wants me to... I know what it wants, Rick snapped. And you're not going to give it the satisfaction. Focus, Morty! You control the shard, not the other way around. The shadow stepped further from the crack, its form warping, shifting as though it was trying to take shape from Morty's own fear. Faces flickered in its body, familiar ones.
Friends, family, strangers screaming. Morty's throat tightened. He saw Summer's face for a flicker, her voice crying out from within the thing, though he knew it wasn't real. "Morty!" Rick barked, snapping him back. "It's baiting you! Ignore it!" The shard flared brighter, resonating not with the shadow, but with the runes around the chamber. Morty felt a tug, not outward, but inward. The shard wasn't trying to give into the shadow. It was calling on him, urging him to push back. Morty's hands trembled as he lifted it higher. "Rick, I think it's giving me something, a way to fight it." Rick's eyes flicked to the shard, then back to the shadow pressing against the door. "Then do it, Morty. Right now, before it forces the door open." The voices in Morty's head rose louder, overlapping, threatening to drown him, but he focused on the shard, on its steady rhythm. He thought of the vault they sealed, of the power that tried to consume him, but failed. He thought of Rick's
hand, steadying him, of refusing to collapse when everything wanted him broken. With a desperate cry, Morty thrust the shard forward.
Light erupted from it, not blinding but sharp, clean. It cut through the resonance like a blade, the runes across the chamber flaring in unison. The shadow recoiled, its form unraveling as the light struck it, its voice twisting into a snarl.
Of fury, this changes nothing. Keys break, locks rust, chains fail, and when they do, you will be mine. With a final screech, the projection collapsed, pulled violently back into the crack. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the hall.
Like thunder, The runes dimmed back to a faint glow, leaving only the ragged sound of Morty's breathing. He staggered, dropping to his knees, the shard still glowing faintly in his hand. I did it, Rick! His words caught, his whole body shaking. Rick crouched beside him, scanning the shard before giving a curt nod. You pushed it back. That's more than most civilizations ever managed. But don't get comfortable, Morty. That was just a sliver of it. The real thing's still behind that door, and now it knows you're the one holding the key. Morty closed his eyes, the shadow's words still echoing in his head. Keys break, locks rust, chains fail. But even as the fear twisted in his chest, there was something else burning beneath it. Anger. It had tried to use his fear, his family, his weakness against him, and for once he hadn't given in. He tightened his grip on the shard, his voice low but steady. Then let it come. I'm not going to let it out. Not ever. Rick's gaze lingered on him, and for once he didn't correct him, didn't mock him, didn't remind him of the impossibility of forever. He just placed a hand on Morty's shoulder, firm and grounding. Good, because the fight's only going to get harder from here. Together they rose, the hall silent around them, but the tension lingering like smoke. The shard pulsed faintly, and the runes lit another path forward, deeper still, into the heart of the mausoleum, where the true test waited. The glow from the runes lingered faintly as Morty and Rick pressed deeper, the silence of the mausoleum broken only by their footsteps, and the faint hum of the shard still vibrating in Morty's grip. Every corner they turned felt heavier, as though the weight of what had just happened, the shadow's projection, its words, its reach, still clung to the air around them. Morty's chest burned with the echo of fear and defiance, the memory of light pouring from the shard, refusing to fade. It was both a relief and a warning, a reminder that he had pushed something ancient back, but only for now. Rick walked briskly ahead, his jaw tight, muttering calculations and theories under his breath. He didn't slow, but Morty could tell he was on edge in the way he gripped his weapon, his eyes flicking constantly between the path ahead and the scanner flickering in his other hand. Energy readings are spiking lower down, big ones, either. It's the root of the containment system, or it's where this thing's claws have sunk deepest.
Either way, he glanced back at Morty. We're not turning around. Morty swallowed, the shard pulsing faintly in his hand, as if it had heard Rick. Do you think it knows we're coming? Like it's waiting? Rick didn't answer right away. He slowed only slightly, his brow furrowing. Thing like that doesn't wait, it pulls. It draws you down the way gravity pulls a planet into orbit. It doesn't care about us the way you care about someone chasing you. You're not Morty, you're momentum.
And once it's got momentum, it doesn't let go. Morty's stomach knotted. He tightened his grip on the shard, but even that comfort was thin. He remembered the shadow's words, keys break, locks rust, chains fail, and wondered if that was what this place was showing him, proof that the shadow's whispers weren't lies but inevitabilities. Yet beneath his fear, the ember of defiance from before still burned. He had stood against it once, he could again. The corridor sloped sharply downward, the walls narrowing until the runes pressed close on either side, their glow brightening, until the passage itself seemed to thrum like a vein carrying light. The further they descended, the more Morty felt pressure in his chest, a pulse like a heartbeat not his own. The shard resonated with it, vibrating in sync, and Morty stumbled. Against the wall, gasping, Rick grabbed his arm, steadying him.
Easy, Morty, don't let it sink. That's how it worms into you. You feel its rhythm and you start thinking it's yours. Morty clutched the shard tighter, focusing on his own breath, on the hammering of his own heart, until the resonance dulled slightly. It's strong down here, Rick. What if it's too strong?
Rick's gaze was sharp, but there was no hesitation in his voice. Then we're stronger, or we fake it until we are. That's survival, Morty. The universe doesn't hand out guarantees. They pressed on, and soon the corridor opened into another vast chamber, far larger than the one before. Here, the runes spiraled across the floor, weaving intricate circles and patterns that glowed like molten lines of gold. At the center of the chamber was a raised dais, and upon it floated a construct unlike anything Morty had ever seen. A great sphere, cracked and bleeding with light, chains of energy snaking outward from it to anchor in the walls. It looked alive, its surface shifting like liquid metal, but the cracks spread slowly wider as Morty watched, and from each fracture leaked darkness like smoke. The shard in his hand flared so violently it almost burned him, and Morty cried out, dropping to his knees. Images flooded his mind, chains snapping, galaxies unraveling, entire star systems swallowed whole in silence. He heard whispers clawing into his skull, voices promising relief if he just let go, if he just gave the shard to the sphere. His fingers twitched against it, muscles rebelling against his will. "Morty!" Rick's voice cut sharp. He crouched beside him, gripping his shoulders.
Don't look at it! Focus on me! Right here, Morty! Me, not it! Morty forced his eyes away from the cracks, breathing hard. The whispers didn't vanish, but they dulled, fading beneath Rick's grip and the grounding weight of his words.
His voice shook, but he managed to speak. It wants the shard, Rick. I can feel it. If I bring it closer, it'll take it." Rick's expression was grim. "Yeah, that's the core containment. It's bleeding out and the shards—"
A match key. Put them together and poof, the door doesn't just open, it shatters. That's what it's banking on. He stood, eyes locked on the sphere. Which means we've got to do the opposite. We use the shard to reinforce the chains, not break them. Morty blinked, still shaking. But how? I don't even know how I made it fight back earlier. It just happened. Rick turned, scanning the spiraling runes across the floor. These patterns, they're conduits, designed to carry energy back into the sphere. All we need is a power source to trigger them. And lucky for us, you've got one burning a hole in your hand.
Morty's chest tightened. "You mean me?" Rick met his gaze. "Yeah, you. But you're not alone this time. I'll guide you. We're going to anchor this thing back into its cage." The thought of channeling that much power again made Morty's stomach twist, but he nodded. Slowly, they stepped onto the dais, the runes pulsing brighter as the shard's glow flared in Morty's hand. The whispers rose, desperate now, clawing at his mind, but he forced himself to focus on Rick's voice. "Place the shard in the center circle. Don't fight its pull. Guide it. Think of it like steering a storm instead of stopping it." He knelt, lowering the shard into the glowing spiral. The instant it touched the floor, light exploded outward, racing along the runes, filling the chamber with radiance. The sphere shook violently, the cracks flaring with both light and shadow, as though torn between breaking and mending. Morty's mind was flooded with screams, with promises, with visions of what would happen if he let go. Rick shouted over the chaos, his voice raw but steady. "Focus, Morty. Don't give in. You're not its vessel. You're its warden. Say
It! Out loud! Morty clenched his fists, tears burning in his eyes as he screamed, "I'm not yours. You don't own me." The shard pulsed in answer, brighter than ever, the light burning through the chamber.
The chains of energy anchoring the sphere snapped taut, reforging themselves, pulling the cracks shut one by one. The darkness shrieked, a sound that rattled the bones, but it was drowned out by the roar of the runes blazing in unison. Morty felt the pull lessen, the whispers weakening, until finally the last crack sealed, the sphere glowing steady and whole once more. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. Morty collapsed forward, gasping, the shard dimming. Gently, in his hand, Rick stood over him, chest heaving, then crouched to help him sit up. "You did it, Morty. You actually did it. You didn't just hold it back, you strengthened the cage." Morty's vision swam, but he managed a shaky smile. I thought it was going to break me, but I think it's scared now, like it knows."
"I can fight it." Rick's eyes softened just a fraction. "Good. Let it be scared, because this isn't over. You've just painted a target on yourself across half the multiverse, and when it tries again, and it will, you'll need that fire you just found."
Morty clutched the shard to his chest, its warmth no longer burning but steady, like a heartbeat of his own. He felt drained, hollowed out, yet strangely alive. For the first time since stepping into the mausoleum, he wasn't just afraid, he was ready. The runes along the floor dimmed back to their faint glow, the chamber falling quiet once more, and together Rick and Morty turned toward the path leading even deeper. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The quiet that settled after the reforging of the prison was unlike any silence Morty had ever known. It wasn't peaceful, it was watchful, the kind of stillness that felt like 1,000 eyes were fixed on him through layers of space and shadow. The shard in his hand was no longer searing, no longer struggling against him. Instead, it pulsed faintly in rhythm with his own heartbeat, as though it had accepted the bond forged in the fire of his defiance. For a moment, Morty allowed himself to breathe, but even as relief whispered through him, the lingering dread reminded him that this wasn't victory. It was only reprieve. Rick dusted off his coat and stared at the sphere, now steady and whole in its lattice of glowing chains. He rubbed a hand across his face, muttering in a low rasp. "Containment stabilized. For now. But I don't like it, Morty. You patched the dam, but the water's still rising. This thing is patient. It'll push again. Maybe tomorrow, maybe 10,000 years from now, but it'll push." He turned his eyes to Morty, hard, but laced with something more. "You ready for that? Because you just made yourself part of the equation. The universe doesn't ignore people who can flip the..."
"Script like that?" Morty swallowed, clutching the shard tighter.
His arms still trembled from the strain of channeling its power, but inside him, past the exhaustion, was a small, undeniable flame. "Yeah, I think I am. I don't know how, but I'm not backing down now. If it tries again, I'll fight."
"It." Rick studied him for a long beat, then gave a sharp nod, like Morty's answer matched something he'd already calculated. Without another word, he turned toward the passage leading deeper into the mausoleum.
Morty followed, his steps heavy but steady, the echo of chains rattling in his ears, even though the chamber behind them had gone silent. The descent grew darker, the runes on the walls dimming as though whatever power fueled them was being drawn elsewhere. The air thickened, not with shadow, but with tension, a weight pressing down that was more than gravity. Morty glanced back once, the sphere's faint glow barely visible now, and felt a pang of unease. It wasn't gone. It was waiting as they moved forward. Morty realized something was shifting in the air itself. The silence was no longer absolute. There were faint tremors, distant rumbles that weren't just echoes of their footsteps. Rick's scanner flickered wildly, readings scrolling too fast to process. He smacked the side of it, scowling. Great. The stabilization sent a ripple, and ripples don't just stop, Morty. They spread. That means eyes, big ones, are looking this way right now. Morty's stomach turned. You mean things out there felt it? Like beyond this place? Rick gave a short, bitter laugh. Not just felt it, they're calculating it. Entities that haven't moved in millennia just sat up in their thrones.
Of bone and starlight because one dumb kid shouted, "I'm not yours," and actually made it stick. Congratulations, Morty, you're on the board now. The words chilled him more than the mausoleum's air. He tried to picture what kind of
things could feel him across the stars, what kind of beings Rick was talking about, and instantly regretted it. But deep down, he knew Rick was right. When he had stood against the shadow, he had felt its reach stretching across universes, and if he could feel it, then surely others could too. The corridor twisted sharply, and suddenly they emerged into a new chamber, not vast like the prison, but intimate, circular, its walls lined with statues carved from obsidian stone. Each statue depicted a different figure, tall and terrible, some with wings, others with too many arms, all faceless but exuding a sense of reverence and dread. The runes here were carved directly into their chests, glowing faintly, pulsing like hearts. Morty slowed, staring. Rick, what is this? Rick's jaw tightened. A hall of witnesses. Guardians, maybe, or trophies. Hard to say. This place wasn't built just to cage something. It was built to remind everyone what happens if it gets out. Morty felt the statues watching him, though their faces were blank. The shard warmed in his palm, as though reacting to their presence, and the faint pulse of their rune hearts began to sync with his. His breath caught, and he stumbled back. Rick, they're looking at me. Rick stepped closer to one of the statues, scanning it. No, Morty, they're recognizing you. You touched the core. You carried the shard into its center and didn't break. That marks you. They're keyed into anyone who interacts with the prison, and now you're burned into their memory. Morty's hands shook. So what does that mean? They're allies? Enemies? What? Rick's expression was unreadable, his eyes shadowed in the dim glow. Means you've got a spotlight on you, kid. Some might want to help you. Others might want to dissect you, but none of them will ignore you. Before Morty could respond, the runes across the statues flared suddenly, light racing from one to the next until the entire chamber pulsed like a living heart. The air trembled, and then a voice, not a whisper like the shadows, but a booming, layered resonance, filled the space. Warden, it said, the sound vibrating in Morty's bones. The chains stir anew, the balance is restored.
But at a cost. You bear the mark. The eyes of the infinite turn upon you. Will you endure? Morty froze, his throat dry. He glanced at Rick, but Rick only gave him a sharp nod, eyes locked on him as if daring him to answer.
Morty forced his lips to move. Yes, I'll endure. The chamber shuddered, the statues vibrating with the sound of the voice. Then, as suddenly as it began, the glow faded, leaving the hall dark once more. Morty staggered, breathless, the shard cooling in his hand. Rick clapped a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Good answer. Whether you believe it or not doesn't matter. What matters is that you said it, and now it's written into the system. You just declared yourself a player, Morty. The cosmos heard you. Morty's mind reeled, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure he had meant the words, not fully, but the moment they left his lips, something inside him had shifted. The flame he had felt earlier flickered brighter, steadier. Maybe he wasn't ready, but maybe readiness didn't matter. Maybe all that mattered was refusing to break. They left the chamber, the statues fading into darkness behind them, and pressed deeper still. Morty clutched the shard close, its pulse matching his own. He didn't know what waited ahead, but he knew this. He had been seen, named, and marked. The eyes of the infinite were upon him, and from now on, every step he took would matter. And as the shadows of the mausoleum stretched before him, Morty realized that the war had already begun. The weight of the statue's silent judgment lingered long after Morty and Rick left the hall. The corridors twisted downward again, carrying them into a deeper, denser silence, though Morty could still feel faint vibrations in the air, like the echo of the voice that had called him Warden. The shard in his palm had cooled to the point of comfort, but he could sense it was no longer just a fragment. It was awake in ways he couldn't describe, a quiet presence in his mind, listening as much as it pulsed. Rick's steps echoed with his usual brisk confidence, but Morty noticed the subtle stiffness in his movements. Rick had seen something in that chamber, something he hadn't said. Morty wanted to ask, but the words stuck in his throat, heavy with the memory of those faceless statues staring at him. Instead he followed, his mind racing with questions he wasn't ready to voice. Eventually the passage widened into another chamber, though this one was smaller and less grand. It looked almost forgotten, dust-coated floors, crumbling walls where the runes had dimmed nearly to nothing. At the far end, half-collapsed stone framed a gateway, its arch lined with faint glyphs that flickered like dying embers. Unlike the other rooms, there was no symmetry here. The air smelled of dust and old fire, as though someone had once fought to keep something in or out. Rick paused, pulling his flask from his coat. He took a long drink, then crouched by the glyphs. His scanner buzzed in his other hand, displaying jagged peaks of unstable readings. Well, here we are, the threshold. Beyond this arch, Morty, is the marrow of the mausoleum. Think of it like the heart that keeps the whole skeleton standing. Whatever we've seen so far was just the rib cage. Morty's stomach tightened. And we're going in? Rick shot him a sidelong glance, flask still in hand. We don't have a choice. That little speech you gave back there lit a beacon. If we don't see what's at the center, we're just wandering blind while every cosmic scavenger sniffs its way here. He tapped the glyphs, and sparks crackled across them like nervous lightning. This gate was meant to stop intruders. Problem is, you're not an intruder anymore, Morty blinked. You mean, it'll let me through? Rick stood, slipping his flask back into his coat. It'll let us through because you'll open it. Morty felt his throat go dry. He stepped closer, holding up the shard without realizing he'd done it. The glyphs stirred faintly, their glow sharpening, aligning with the shard's rhythm. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard whispering, not like the oppressive shadow, but layered voices, curious, almost welcoming. He pressed the shard forward, and the glyphs flared so brightly that Morty had to shield his eyes. The arch groaned. Stone dust rained down as the gateway split with a grinding sigh, revealing a corridor of pure black. It wasn't just darkness, it was absence, so complete that Morty's stomach lurched when he tried to focus on it. Rick's scanner wailed. Before flickering into static, he shut it off with a growl. Great, no readings. Morty, we're flying blind from here on out. Stay close. Don't touch anything that looks like it wants to be touched. And if you hear your name whispered, don't.
Answer. Morty nodded quickly, his pulse hammering.
He followed Rick through the arch, and instantly the air shifted. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was alive, pressing in from all sides. Morty could feel it prickling across his skin, brushing against his thoughts like unseen fingers, testing his edges. He gripped the shard tighter, its glow the only light piercing the void. As they walked, the floor beneath them began to change. It wasn't stone anymore, but something smoother, like obsidian glass. Their reflections trailed beneath their feet, distorted, stretching tall and thin, their faces warped into grotesque shapes. Morty tried not to look down, but the reflections shifted on their own, moving slightly behind their steps, as if lagging by a heartbeat. Rick muttered under his breath, "Figures! Memory glass! This place is recording us!" Morty's eyes darted to him. "Recording us for what?" Rick didn't answer, which was worse than any explanation he could have given. The corridor eventually widened again, opening into a cavern so vast Morty couldn't see the edges. The shard's glow revealed only a fraction, but what it revealed made his breath catch. All around them, rising like pillars, were colossal chains. They extended into the void above and below, each link larger than a building, humming with restrained power. The sound they made was constant, a deep vibration that rattled Morty's bones, reminding him of the prison chamber. But this was on a scale far beyond. Rick tilted his head back, eyes narrowing.
The true bindings? What you fixed back there, that was just the lock. This is what it was holding down. Morty's voice shook. And what is it holding down? Rick didn't answer immediately. He pulled a device from his coat, a small
orb that projected faint blue lines into the air, mapping only a sliver of the chains before flickering out. He pocketed it with a grim look. Something we're not equipped to wake. But Morty, listen to me. These chains are vibrating harder
than they should. Something has been pulling at them from the outside. Someone's trying to break it free. Morty's heart pounded.
He thought of the statues calling him warden, of the voice telling him the eyes of the infinite were upon him. It all clicked in a terrible instant. They knew this would happen, that someone would try. That's why they built all this. He nodded once, his face pale in the shard's glow. Exactly. And now you're marked as the counterweight. Before Morty could respond, the chains nearest them shuddered violently, a single massive link grinding against another with a sound like thunder. The shard in his hand flared in response, searing with sudden light. Morty cried out, clutching it, but it didn't burn. It urged, pulling his hand toward the chains as though demanding he act. Rick grabbed his wrist. "Morty, focus! It's calling you because it needs reinforcement. The bindings are strained. If you don't answer, if you hesitate even for a second, something will give." Morty stared at the towering chains, the weight of what was being asked crushing down on him. His body trembled, his mind screamed that he wasn't enough, but deep within, the shard pulsed steady, like a heart lending him its rhythm. He raised it toward the chains. The flare of light that followed wasn't just brightness, it was sound, force, memory, all crashing together as Morty felt himself pulled forward, through the shard, into the chain itself. For a moment he wasn't standing in the cavern anymore. He was inside the vibration, inside the struggle of lock and prisoner, his voice echoing through the links. And somewhere in that depth, something vast and formless turned its attention toward him. The world dissolved into vibration and light as Morty felt himself swallowed by the pulse of the chains. His body was still there, in the cavern, but his mind had been pulled inside the very rhythm that held the bindings together. He wasn't falling, not exactly. It was more like being stretched across the links, his thoughts vibrating in tandem with their colossal hum. Every pulse carried weight, memory, and intent, as though the chains themselves were alive, a living will woven from countless ages of resistance. At first, the sensation was overwhelming. Morty clutched desperately to the shard, though it had melted into his hand like it was part of him now, its glow a tether, keeping him from unraveling completely. The chains sang, deep and endless, their tone resonating through his ribs. He could feel their strain, the constant pull of something vast pressing from below, trying to rise against them. And in that struggle, Morty felt the truth. The bindings weren't just metal. They were made of promises, oaths, and sacrifices, layers of will forged together by those who had once called him Warden. A voice stirred inside the resonance, low and massive, shaking him down to the marrow. You stand in the fracture. You bear the shard. You are the seal and the seam. Morty tried to speak, but the sound that left him wasn't his voice. It was like his words were being carried by the chains themselves. What are you holding?" There was a pause, if such a thing could exist in vibration, and then the reply came, carrying not words, but impressions that burned directly into his mind. Hunger without limit, darkness with thought, a will vast enough to swallow stars. Morty staggered under the weight of it, nearly letting go of the tether. He wanted to look away, to forget, but he couldn't. The chains had shown him only a sliver of what lay beneath them, and that sliver alone was enough to make him tremble, with the certainty that if the bindings broke, everything he knew would vanish into that void. Rick's voice broke through faintly, distorted as if across static. "Morty, don't let it talk you into anything. Just reinforce the chains. You don't need to." His words cut off, swallowed by the resonance. The vast presence stirred again, and this time it spoke directly into Morty's thoughts. "They fear me because they built me. I was their shadow, the reflection of their hunger made flesh. They buried me here and made you their warden, little fragment of a soul too young to remember. Why do you serve them still?" Morty shook his head violently, though his body was somewhere far away. "I didn't choose this. I don't want any of this. But if I get free, the presence purred, its voice like 1,000 whispers converging. Then the hunger returns to its source.
No more chains, no more guardians, only balance restored. Do you think your grandfather would let me live? Do you think he has not already fed me pieces of himself in every invention he built?" Morty faltered, confusion threading through his fear.
The presence was trying to sow doubt, but some of its words struck uncomfortably close. He thought of Rick, of all the reckless experiments, of the holes in reality patched by makeshift solutions. He thought of the exhaustion in Rick's face, the constant drinking, the way he never let Morty see what really weighed on him. Could it be true? Was Rick already feeding this thing, knowingly or not? The shard pulsed sharply in his hand, as though sensing Morty's hesitation. It steadied him, reminded him of the statue's silent gaze, the trust they had placed in him. He clenched his jaw. Maybe Rick's messed up. Maybe he is part of the problem, but I'm not letting you out. Not now, not ever. The chains roared, their hum turning into a violent vibration that rattled every thought from his skull. The presence surged, pressing harder, testing his resolve. Morty cried out, straining to hold the tether. Images slammed into him, worlds swallowed in shadow, skies devoured, people screaming as the void consumed them. It wasn't just threat, it was memory, proof of what this thing had done before it was bound. Morty planted his will against it, gripping the shard tighter until his knuckles ached. "No, you're staying down here!" Light burst from the shard, flowing down his arm, spreading into the chain. The vibration shifted, no longer a struggle but a reinforcement, as though his defiance had merged with the ancient will that forged the bindings. The links flared with blinding brilliance, and the pull of the presence weakened, receding into the depths with a hiss of fury. Morty gasped, and suddenly he was back in his body, stumbling in the cavern. His knees nearly buckled, and Rick caught, his arm steadying him. Morty's chest heaved as though he'd just run for miles. Rick's face was pale, eyes sharp with uncharacteristic concern. "Morty!" "What did you see?" Morty swallowed, still shaking. It tried to talk to me, said it was their shadow, said they built it. Rick, it knows you." Rick's jaw tightened. For a moment, his usual mask of cynicism cracked, revealing something raw underneath, recognition. He didn't ask what else it said, which told Morty he already knew.
Rick looked up at the chains, stretching into the void, his mouth a hard line. "Then it's worse than I thought," he muttered. "They didn't just trap a monster down here, they trapped an idea, something born out of the same minds that thought binding it was a good solution. And if it's stirring now, it means someone out there is tugging the leash." Morty's head spun, the shard still pulsing faintly in his palm. "Rick, am I really the warden? Is that what they made me for?"
Rick glanced at him, his expression unreadable, then looked away. "Doesn't matter what they made you for. What matters is you're the only one keeping those chains from snapping, which means, Morty, like it or not, you're holding the line." Before Morty could respond, a tremor shook the cavern. The chains groaned, and far off in the void, another vibration answered, not from within, but from beyond the walls of the mausoleum itself. The sound was sharper, deliberate, like something hammering at the edges. Rick cursed under his breath. "They're not waiting for us to figure this out. Someone's already trying to cut through." Morty's stomach dropped. The shard flared again in his grip, ready but trembling, as though even it feared what was coming. The tremor that rippled through the cavern felt sharper this time, less like the natural groan of an ancient place, and more like a strike, intentional, directed. Dust trickled from the high archways, drifting like ash in the stale air. Morty's grip on the shard tightened until his hand ached. He could still feel the echo of the voice inside his skull, but it was fading, replaced by the urgency of something new pressing against the edges of the mausoleum. Rick's gaze darted around the chamber, his eyes flicking from the chains to the fractured walls. His hands twitched, searching pockets until he pulled out a device that looked hastily cobbled together from scraps of circuitry and glass tubing. It hummed weakly when he powered it on, its screen spitting static before, resolving into jagged lines. Each spike on the graph vibrated in rhythm with the blows against the mausoleum. "They're using resonance drilling," Rick muttered, jaw tightening. "Not even subtle about it. Whoever's out there doesn't give a shit if the walls collapse. They just want in fast." Morty swallowed hard, the knot in his stomach tightening. "You mean they're trying to get to that thing?" Rick didn't look at him, still focused on the readings. "No, Morty, they're not just trying. They know what's in here. And if they're half as reckless as I think they are, they'll crack this place wide open and give our pal downstairs exactly what it wants." He snapped the device shut and shoved it back into his coat. "We've got maybe minutes before they breach. We need a plan." The tremors came again, closer, louder, shaking the ground beneath them. The statues along the walls rattled in their alcoves, some leaning precariously as dust, cascaded in streams. Morty looked up at them, at their blank stares fixed on him, as though silently demanding he act. His chest felt tight, every breath dragging. I don't know if I
Can do it again, Morty said quietly.
His voice shook, betraying the fear clawing at him. That thing, it almost pulled me in. If I slip, Rick, it's over. What if I make it worse? Rick turned, finally looking at him. His face was hard, but there was no mockery in his expression. This time, no flippant dismissal, just raw honesty. Morty, you already did it once. You stood your ground when even I couldn't. You think I don't know how much it took out of you? But if you're waiting for someone else to carry this, you'll be waiting until the chains snap. No one's coming to save us. The words landed.
Heavy, but there was a strange steadiness in them too, like a brutal kind of encouragement. Morty met Rick's gaze, the shard in his hand pulsing faintly, and felt a flicker of something through the fear. Resolve?
Fragile, but real. Another strike reverberated through the mausoleum, this one splitting a thin crack along the far wall. Light from outside bled through the fracture, not sunlight, but the cold, sterile glow of artificial lamps. Through it, Morty caught the faint outlines of figures, dark shapes moving with purpose, carrying tools that shimmered like serrated blades of sound. Rick cursed under his breath.
Shit! They've got phasic cutters. That means they're working with tech that can shear through layered seals. Whoever they are, they've done their homework. He yanked out another device, this one like a warped tuning fork, and jammed it into the ground.
A wave of discordant noise pulsed out, momentarily stalling the drilling outside. The crack trembled, but didn't widen further. Rick wiped sweat from his brow, muttering, "That'll buy us a little time, not much." Morty stared at the faint silhouettes through the crack, heart hammering. "Rick, who are they? Why would anyone want to let that thing out?" Rick's expression darkened. "Because power, Morty. There's always someone out there stupid enough to think they can control what should never be touched. Doesn't matter if it's governments, cults, or corporations. Dress it up however you want, it always comes down to the same rotten hunger." He spat to the side, then added grimly, "And if they succeed, we're not just screwed. The whole multiverse is." The shard pulsed again in Morty's grip, brighter this time, almost as if urging him toward the chains. The statues seemed to lean closer in the flickering light, their silent stares heavier than ever. Morty could almost hear their voices, beneath the hum of the bindings, echoing the choice back at him.
"I don't want this," Morty whispered, his throat tight. "I don't want to be some warden. I just wanted—" He broke off, the words dying on his tongue. He didn't even know what he had wanted anymore. Normalcy, maybe. Or just
A life that wasn't constantly teetering on the edge of something catastrophic. But those wants felt so small now in the face of the chains, the cavern, the thing below, and the enemies hammering at the gates. Rick's hand landed on his shoulder, surprisingly firm. "You don't get to pick the cards, Morty. Nobody does. You just play what you've got, and right now you've got the shard, the chains, and the fact that the damn universe decided you're the one who can keep this place locked. You want out? Fine. But if you walk away, the thing we're fighting doesn't stop. It just gets out faster." Morty closed his eyes, trembling. He thought of the voice, the promises it whispered, the visions of devoured worlds. He thought of Rick, always carrying more than he admitted. And he thought of himself, frightened, unprepared, but here anyway. When he opened his eyes again, the flicker of resolve burned brighter. He nodded, gripping the shard with both hands now. "Okay, tell me what to do." Rick let out a slow breath, relief hidden beneath his usual gruffness. You link with the chains again, reinforce them before the breach widens. Don't fight the voice this time, anchor against it. Make the bindings remember what they were built for. I'll handle the intruders long enough to give you space. Morty's stomach dropped. Wait, you mean you're going out there? Against them? Rick smirked faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. Relax, Morty. I'm not planning to win, just planning to stall. That's kind of my specialty. The mausoleum shook violently, the crack in the wall widening as a piece of stone broke free and clattered across the floor. Through the gap, Morty caught a clearer glimpse of the figures outside, armored, masked, their tools glowing brighter as they prepared the next strike. Rick stepped toward the breach, pulling a weapon from his coat that looked half-finished, wires sparking along its frame. He glanced back at Morty one last time. Lock it down, Morty. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, don't let go. Morty's throat tightened, but he nodded. He turned toward the chains, raising the shard, its glow already weaving into the bindings like threads of fire. The hum grew louder, pressing against his mind, and once more he felt himself being drawn into the vibration, into the endless tension between will and hunger. Behind him, the first surge of combat roared as Rick met the intruders at the breach. The clash of weapons and the hiss of Facet cutters filled the chamber, but Morty forced himself not to look back. His world was the chains now, the shard, the silent demand of the statues. The voice stirred in the depths again, low and cunning. They come for me, little warden. They bleed for me. Will you bleed too? Morty's jaw clenched, his knuckles white around the shard. I'm not bleeding for you. I'm bleeding to keep you buried. And with that, he plunged fully into the resonance once more, the cavern's chaos fading into a single, endless hum. The hum of the chains swallowed Morty whole, dragging him deeper than before. It wasn't just a vibration now, but a current, something that coursed through his bones and pulled at his thoughts, threading him into the mausoleum itself. His heartbeat stuttered, then fell in rhythm with the resonance, every thud syncing with the pulsations of the shard. He could feel the bindings stretching across the void, vast and infinite, lattices of force straining to hold back the abyssal thing that pressed against them. The voice lingered in the darkness, sly and patient. You cannot hold me forever, little warden. Chains rust, stone crumbles, all that endures is hunger. Morty gritted his teeth, clutching the shard tighter, pushing his mind against the endless pull. His body trembled, but he forced himself to picture the chains, not as brittle links waiting to fail, but as roots, living, endless, digging deeper into the foundation of existence. The statues seemed to lean closer in his mind's eye, their faceless presences guiding him, not speaking, but steadying him. Somewhere beyond the resonance, the clash of combat tore through the cavern. Sparks of sound and light echoed through Morty's tethered awareness. Rick's voice barked curses and sharp retorts, drowned at times by the metallic screech of weapons striking. Morty tried to block it out, to keep himself locked on the bindings, but every shudder of impact against the mausoleum threatened to unravel his concentration. Through the crack, Rick faced three figures clad in segmented armor, masks glowing faintly with shifting glyphs. Their phasic cutters carved arcs of shimmering force, slicing through the air with predatory precision. Rick's cobbled weapon spat unstable bursts of energy, each shot distorting the air with crackling static. One intruder fell back with a charred gash across their chest plate, but two others pressed harder, moving with mechanical coordination.
You assholes don't know what you're poking at, Rick snarled, ducking under a strike and countering with a wild swing of the sparking device. This thing gets out, it's not going to grant your boss a wish. It's going to eat him first, and
Then everything else. The intruders didn't answer, their movements silent, efficient. One cutter hissed across Rick's arm, slicing shallow but burning deep. He grimaced, staggered, but pushed forward with a savage energy, forcing them away from the breach for a moment. Morty felt the tremor ripple through the chains, as if the battle itself pressed against the bindings. The voice inside surged with glee. See how easily he falters? How quickly the strong bleed? Your anchor is nothing but a drunk clinging to scraps. When he falls, so will you. Morty's stomach churned, but he dug deeper into the resonance, imagining the shard's light weaving itself into the links, reinforcing each one with strands of his will. Sweat streamed down his forehead, his body convulsing with the strain. He whispered through clenched teeth, "Not falling, not letting you out." The abyss pressed harder, the entity pushing at him with visions, worlds drowned in shadow, skies torn open, oceans boiling as its hunger spread unchecked. Morty staggered under the weight of it, his knees buckling, but then another presence flickered within the resonance. It wasn't the statues this time, but something subtler, a memory, not words, but the feeling of Rick's hand on his shoulder, the rough honesty in his voice when he'd said no one else was coming to save them. That memory anchored Morty. He pushed back, not with power, but with defiance, the stubborn refusal to give in. The shard pulsed brighter, threads of its light streaking across the bindings, sealing fractures Morty hadn't even noticed until now. The chains hummed louder, resonating with his heartbeat. Rick was losing ground outside. One of the intruders drove him to the floor, their cutter raised high. Rick snarled and jammed his sparking weapon upward, the unstable burst detonating against their chest plate in a flash of electricity. The intruder convulsed, collapsing in a smoking heap, but Rick rolled to the side just as the last attacker slashed down, the cutter grazing stone where his head had been. He coughed blood, wiped it from his lip, and fired another wild burst to keep them at bay. His movements were slowing, though. Morty could hear the ragged edge of his breathing, even through the hum. The abyss seized on it, whispering hungrily, "He cannot last. When he falls, the intruders will free me, and your struggle will mean nothing. Why suffer when you could stand with me instead? I would make you more than a trembling boy. I would make you eternal." Morty's grip on the shard wavered, his vision blurring. For a moment, the promise was tempting, a way to stop feeling small, powerless. But then he remembered the cost, the ruined visions it had already shown him, the endless hunger that never gave, only devoured. He forced the thought out, focusing everything on the shard's pulse. "I'm not eternal," Morty hissed. "I'm just me."
And that's enough. With a roar of effort, he poured himself into the resonance. The chains blazed with sudden brilliance, their hum turning into a thunderous vibration that shook the mausoleum to its foundations. The statues vibrated, dust raining from them as if acknowledging his choice. Outside, the intruder staggered at the shockwave, their cutter faltering for a heartbeat. Rick seized the opening, slamming his sparking weapon into their mask. The glyphs across it shattered as the intruder convulsed and collapsed, unmoving.
Rick dropped to his knees, coughing hard, blood flecking his lips. His weapon fizzled and went dead, but the breach was quiet now, the attackers down. He dragged himself upright against the fractured wall, breathing in shallow rasps. Inside the
Resonance! Morty felt the chains tighten, the abyss recoiling under their renewed strength.
The voice hissed with fury. "You think this is victory? This is delay. Sooner or later they will return. Sooner or later you will tire, and when you do, I will be waiting." Morty didn't answer. He just held on, reinforcing every link, weaving his defiance into the lattice until the voice dimmed into the depths again, sullen and silent. When the resonance finally released him, Morty collapsed to the floor, gasping, his body drenched in sweat. The shard in his hand still glowed faintly, warm against his palm. He looked up to see Rick slumped against the wall, blood on his coat, but alive. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. They had held for now, but both of them knew the fight wasn't over. The mausoleum was quiet again, but it was a fragile quiet, like the pause before a storm. Rick's ragged breathing echoed in the cavern, sharp and uneven, each inhale catching on a chest that had been battered nearly to breaking. His fingers trembled as he pressed them against the wall for support, smearing blood across the stone. Morty crawled toward him, still shaking from the resonance, his body refusing to obey with the steadiness he wanted. The shard in his hand throbbed faintly, its glow dimmed but steady, a reminder of what he had just endured. For a long, fragile moment, neither spoke. Morty finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse.
They were after it. After the thing inside, weren't they? Rick spat blood onto the ground and let out a bitter laugh that dissolved into a cough. No shit, Morty. People don't wear masks like that unless they're in some
creepy death cult. And death cults don't show up unless they think they've got a way to pop the lid off something dangerous. The words sank into Morty with a weight that pressed harder than the exhaustion in his limbs. He looked back at the sealed breach, the faint shimmer of the bindings still visible in his mind, even though the resonance had ebbed. The silence in the chamber felt unnatural, as if the thing inside was only pretending to sleep. Rick pushed himself, upright, swaying but refusing Morty's offer to help. His hands shook as he rummaged through his pockets, producing a cracked flask and taking a long swig. He winced as it burned down his throat, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. We bought ourselves time. That's it. Time. Morty hugged the shard closer to his chest, the memory of the voice still crawling through the back of his skull. It talked to me, Rick. It showed me things. Whole worlds just gone.
It wanted me to... He broke off, unable to force the rest of it out, the words too heavy. Rick's expression hardened, the alcohol dulling nothing in his eyes. Yeah, that's its game. Fear and promises. It's not your friend, Morty. It's not anyone's friend. You give it an inch, it takes galaxies.
The boy nodded shakily, though the echo of the offer still lingered like a phantom warmth in his bones. Eternal. Powerful. It had whispered the one thing he'd always been afraid he would never be. He shoved the thought down, clenching the shard tighter until its edges dug into his palm. Rick slumped back against the wall, his energy almost gone, but his mind still working. Those goons weren't freelancing. Somebody sent them, which means somebody out there knows about this mausoleum, knows about what's chained up inside. That narrows the suspect list down to a very dangerous few. Morty swallowed. So what do we do? If they know, they'll come back, right? Rick closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw tight. They'll come back with more. And stronger. Which means we either get ahead of them, or we get buried with the statues. The mausoleum groaned faintly as dust trickled from above. The weight of the world pressing down. Morty stared at the faceless statues, at the way they seemed to watch silently, unmoving yet endlessly present. They weren't saviors, he realized. They were witnesses. All of this, Rick's blood, his own trembling hands, the intruders lying dead, was just one act in a performance that had been replayed across time. He didn't like the thought, but he couldn't shake it. Rick stirred again, pulling a flickering device from his belt and fumbling with its cracked display. We need intel. Whoever's backing these clowns, they'll have left a trail. Cult networks, hidden bases, dimensional signatures. I can triangulate some of it if this thing doesn't completely crap out. He smacked the device with the heel of his hand, and it buzzed weakly to life. The glow reflected in Morty's tired eyes. He didn't fully understand the technology, but the jagged lines on the screen reminded him of the chains, a web stretching wider than he could see.
And if we find them? Rick met his gaze, his face set. Then we decide if we kill them first, or if we run faster than they can follow. Morty shivered, not because of Rick's words, but because he realized both options sounded equally
Impossible. The shard pulsed again, as if in agreement with the darkness waiting beyond the chains. He leaned closer, lowering his voice as if afraid the mausoleum itself was listening. Rick, what if it's already stronger than the chains? What if every time I fight it, it just gets closer to breaking free? For once, Rick didn't snap back with a quick retort. He just looked at Morty, the weariness in his eyes betraying that he had already asked himself the same question. Finally, he muttered, "Then we figure out how to hold it longer. That's the job. Nobody else is going to do it." Morty let the silence linger. It wasn't an answer that gave hope, but it was an answer that felt true. He forced himself to breathe, to let the shard's hum steady him again. Their quiet moment fractured when one of the fallen intruders twitched. Morty yelped and staggered back, his heart slamming against his ribs. Rick's gun was up in a heartbeat, though it wheezed with barely any charge left. The figure convulsed once more, then went limp for good, smoke curling from the cracked mask. Rick didn't lower his weapon right away. He waited, watching with an intensity that kept Morty frozen. Only after a long pause did he let the barrel drop. "See? Even dead, this place doesn't want to give you peace. Get used to it." Morty forced himself to look again at the bodies, at the lifeless masks. He wondered who they had been, what had made them kneel to the hunger in the first place. Were they just tools, or had they believed in the voice the way it had tempted him to? That thought made his stomach turn. Rick tucked the sparking weapon back into his belt and began limping toward the exit. "Come on, Morty, we can't hole up here. They'll send more, and the last thing we want is to be sitting ducks when they do." Morty hesitated, glancing one last time at the breach, at the faint shimmer of the chains he alone could still feel. The silence pressed at him again, thick and waiting. The voice didn't speak, but he felt it watching, patient as ever. He tore, his gaze away, and hurried after Rick, the shard's glow clutched tight in his palm. The mausoleum swallowed their footsteps, each echo fading into the endless dark, as though the place itself were content to let them go, for now. When they reached the fractured passage that led back toward the surface, Rick leaned heavily on the wall, his breath ragged. Morty noticed the dark stain spreading across his coat where the cutter had grazed him. He opened his mouth to say something, but Rick cut him off. "Don't." "I'm fine. Save it." But Morty could tell he wasn't fine, not even close. And as they climbed, the weight of what lingered below pressed on him, heavier than the stone overhead. The battle had been won, but it hadn't ended. It never truly would, because the chains might hold tonight. But hunger didn't stop. Hunger waited,